The engine exploded at 30,000 feet. One moment, Daniel Carter was reviewing safety protocols in seat 14B. The next, the cabin filled with smoke and screaming metal. Through the chaos, he saw her, Eleanor Grant, the CEO who'd never learned his name, thrown against the bulkhead, blood streaming down her face. The plane tore apart. The ocean rushed up to meet them. And in those final seconds before impact, Daniel made a choice that would redefine everything they thought they knew about power, survival, and what it truly means to save someone's life. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're already hooked, hit that like button. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. The morning had started like any other corporate Tuesday. Daniel Carter stood in the employee parking lot of Grant Tech Industries, watching the sunrise paint the glass headquarters in shades of amber and gold. His 12-year-old Toyota looked out of place among the Teslas and Mercedes, but he'd stopped caring about that years ago. He had different priorities. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. "Dad, don't forget, parent night is Thursday. Love you." He smiled, typing back quickly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart. Love you more." At 42, Daniel had learned to measure success differently than most people in the building. He wasn't climbing ladders or networking at cocktail parties. He was raising Emma alone and doing it well. The maintenance supervisor position paid enough to keep them comfortable, and his flexible schedule meant he could be there for Emma's soccer games, school plays, and the thousand small moments that made up a childhood. The corporate jet assignment had come as a surprise. "Daniel, we need you on the Seattle trip," his manager had said Friday afternoon. Regular maintenance guy called in sick, just a quick inspection and sign-off. "You'll fly up with the executive team Tuesday morning, check the client's HVAC system, fly back same day." Same-day trips meant missing dinner with Emma, but the overtime pay would cover her summer camp. Besides, it was just one day. He'd had no idea it would be the day that changed everything. Oh, the private terminal at the airport existed in a different world. No security lines, no crying babies, no overpriced coffee, just polished marble, leather chairs, and people whose time was measured in thousands of dollars per hour. Daniel felt the familiar invisibility settle over him as he walked through. To the executives checking their phones and sipping espresso, he might as well have been part of the furniture. The maintenance guy. The help. Someone whose name they'd never need to know. He'd made peace with it long ago. "Mr. Carter," a flight attendant approached with a professional smile. "You're in seat 14B. We'll be boarding in just a few minutes." "Thank you." He settled into the waiting area, pulling out the paperwork for the Seattle job. Standard HVAC maintenance, nothing complicated. He'd be back home by dinner time tomorrow at the latest. "Ladies and gentlemen, Grant Tech Flight 47 to Seattle is now ready for boarding." Daniel gathered his things and joined the small group heading toward the gleaming Gulfstream G650, say 12 passengers total, all executives except him. He recognized a few faces from the employee newsletters, VP of Operations, Chief Financial Officer, heads of various departments, and then there was Eleanor Grant herself. She swept through the terminal like a force of nature, her presence commanding attention without effort. At 53, she'd built Grant Tech from a small software startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Forbes called her visionary. Fortune called her ruthless. Her employees called her ma'am and kept their distance. Daniel had seen her exactly 3 times in his 5 years with the company. Twice from across crowded rooms at company meetings. Once in passing in a hallway where she'd looked straight through him as if he didn't exist. She boarded the plane without glancing at anyone, her assistant trailing behind with a tablet and a worried expression. "Ms. Grant, the revised projections are concerning. The Seattle office is underperforming by—" "I'll handle it." Eleanor's voice cut through the murmur of conversation like a blade. "That's why we're making this trip." Daniel found his seat toward the rear of the cabin and buckled in. Through the window, dawn was breaking fully now, the sky a canvas of pink and gold. Emma would be getting ready for school. He pulled out his phone to send one more text before takeoff. "Have an amazing day, sweetheart. See you tomorrow night." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Fly safe, Dad. Love you to the moon." "And back," he typed, completing their ritual. The engines hummed to life. Daniel pocketed his phone and settled back, trying not to think about how much he hated flying. The rational part of his brain knew it was statistically safer than driving, The irrational part remembered his own father's small plane going down when Daniel was 16 and how they'd never found the wreckage. He forced the thought away. This was a state-of-the-art corporate jet, not a single-engine Cessna. Everything would be fine. The plane taxied down the runway, engines building to a roar. Daniel gripped the armrests and watched the ground fall away. Seattle was only a 2-hour flight. Nothing to worry about. For the first hour, he tried to work. The cabin was quiet, except for the occasional murmur of conversation from the executives up front. They talked numbers, markets, acquisitions, a language Daniel understood only peripherally. He focused on his own paperwork, reviewing the technical specifications for the Seattle job. "Coffee, Mr. Carter?" The flight attendant appeared at his elbow, professional and courteous. One of the small luxuries of private aviation, everyone got treated well, even the maintenance supervisor. "Please, black. Thank you." She returned a moment later with coffee in an actual ceramic cup, not the disposable kind he was used to. Small touches like that reminded him just how different this world was from his own. Up front, he could see Eleanor through the gap between seats. She sat alone, her assistant having moved to a different row. Even surrounded by her own team, she seemed isolated. Daniel wondered what that was like, to have so much power but so little connection. Then again, maybe she preferred it that way. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jolting Daniel's coffee. He set it down carefully, breathing through the wave of anxiety. Just rough air, completely normal. But the turbulence didn't stop. The plane shuddered again, harder this time. The seatbelt light dinged on. Up front, conversations died away. People grabbed armrests, exchanged nervous glances. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Richardson. We're experiencing some unexpected weather. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Daniel's hands tightened on the armrests. The turbulence was getting worse. The plane dropped suddenly, then recovered, then dropped again. Someone gasped. A laptop clattered to the floor. "It's fine," Daniel told himself. "Planes are built for this. They can handle it." Then the engines changed pitch. It was subtle at first, a shift in the background hum that most passengers probably didn't notice. But Daniel had spent 20 years working with machines. He knew what they sounded like when something went wrong. The plane banked sharply. Not a normal turn, something desperate, evasive. Coffee cups slid across tables. A woman cried out. The seatbelt light started flashing. "Folks, we're going to need you to assume crash positions." The captain's voice cut off, and then the world exploded. Later, Daniel would struggle to describe those next seconds. How the plane seemed to tear itself apart from the inside out. How the explosion, somewhere in the starboard engine, sent a shockwave through the entire aircraft. How the cabin filled with smoke and screaming metal, and the terrible, certain knowledge that they were going down. The oxygen mask dropped. Daniel grabbed his instinctively, but the smoke was already choking, blinding. He couldn't see more than a few feet, couldn't hear anything except alarms and the roar of wind, and the high, keening shriek of the dying plane. They were spinning, falling. The G-forces pressed him into his seat, then threw him against the seatbelt, then pressed him down again. "Emma," he thought. "Emma, I'm sorry." The thought of his daughter, waiting for him, believing he'd come home, cut through the panic. He couldn't die. He couldn't leave her alone. The plane hit something, a violent impact that threw Daniel forward against his seatbelt hard enough to crack ribs. The smoke cleared for just a moment, and through the chaos he saw the impossible. They were falling toward water, the Pacific Ocean, endless and dark, rushing up to meet them. Daniel grabbed the seat in front of him and held on. Somewhere in the cabin, someone was praying, someone else was screaming. His own voice felt locked in his throat. 5 seconds, he thought, maybe less. The plane hit the water like a bomb. The impact was catastrophic. Metal shrieked, glass shattered. The ocean exploded through the broken fuselage, cold and merciless, swallowing everything. Daniel's seatbelt held, but his seat didn't. The entire row tore free from the floor, and suddenly he was underwater, tumbling, the wreckage spinning around him in a nightmare of twisted metal and broken bodies. His lungs screamed for air. The water was ice cold, shocking every nerve. He couldn't tell which way was up. Swim. You have to swim. He kicked free of the seat, fighting the undertow of the sinking plane. His hand hit something solid, a piece of fuselage. He grabbed it, pulled himself along it, desperate for the surface. His vision was going dark at the edges. His chest felt like it would explode. And then his head broke the surface. Daniel gasped, sucking in air and ocean spray. Debris floated everywhere, seat cushions, luggage, pieces of the plane. The tail section was sinking 50 yards away, trailing smoke and fire. He treaded water, coughing, trying to process what had just happened. The plane was gone. They'd crashed. They'd actually crashed. Emma. Emma. I'm alive. I'm still alive. A scream cut through the sound of the waves. Daniel spun in the water, searching. There, 30 feet away, someone was struggling, thrashing at the surface, going under, coming back up. He didn't think. He just swam. The current fought him. His broken ribs sent lightning bolts of pain through his chest with every stroke. But he kicked harder, arms pulling through the water, closing the distance. The person went under again. Daniel dove, reaching blind, and his hand caught fabric. He pulled hard, and the body came up with him. It was Eleanor Grant. Blood streamed from a gash on her forehead. Her eyes were glazed, unfocused. She was barely conscious, and she definitely couldn't swim. "I've got you," Daniel gasped. "I've got you. Don't fight me." She didn't seem to hear. Her hands clawed at him, panic overriding reason. He got an arm around her chest and started swimming on his back, dragging her with him. "Don't fight," he repeated. "Just breathe. I've got you." But where was he swimming to? He spun in the water again, searching the horizon. Nothing, just endless ocean in every direction, except there. A dark shape on the horizon. Land? An island? It was impossible to tell from water level, but it was the only thing that wasn't ocean. Daniel started swimming. His broken ribs made every stroke agony. Eleanor was dead weight, and the current kept trying to pull them under. The island, if it even was an island, looked impossibly far away. But what choice did he have? "Emma," he thought. "I promised I'd come home." So he swam. Stroke after stroke, breath after breath. The sun beat down. The salt water stung his eyes and burned his throat. His muscles screamed. His lungs burned. His vision started to blur. But he didn't stop. Eleanor had stopped fighting. She hung limp in his grip, either unconscious or too weak to struggle. Daniel couldn't tell if she was breathing, couldn't afford to check. Just swim. Just keep swimming. The dark shape on the horizon grew larger. Definitely land. An island, small and tree-covered. Maybe a mile away? Maybe less. Daniel's arms felt like lead. His legs were cramping. The broken ribs sent sharp pains through his chest with every breath. Can't stop. Can't give up. He thought of Emma. Her smile, her laugh, the way she hugged him goodnight. The parent night he'd promised to attend. "I have to get home." The water around them was littered with debris from the crash. Seat cushions, pieces of luggage, fragments of the plane. Daniel grabbed a floating seat cushion and shoved it under Eleanor, using it to help keep her afloat. It wasn't much, but it helped. The island was closer now. He could make out a beach, trees, rocky outcroppings. Almost there. Just a little further. His strength was fading. His vision was starting to tunnel. But the waves were pushing them toward shore now, helping instead of fighting. Daniel's feet suddenly hit sand. He almost sobbed with relief. Shallow water. He could touch bottom. He stumbled, caught himself, dragged Eleanor through the surf. She was breathing. He could feel it now. Shallow and ragged, but breathing. The beach rose to meet them. Daniel pulled Eleanor onto the sand above the tide line and then collapsed beside her. For a long moment, he just lay there, gasping, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. The sky overhead was impossibly blue. The sun was warm on his face. He was alive. "I'm alive." "Emma," he whispered. "I'm still alive." But a groan from beside him. Daniel forced himself to move, rolling onto his side to look at Eleanor. She was a mess. Blood matted her hair from the head wound. Her designer suit was torn and soaked. Her left leg was bent at an angle that made Daniel's stomach turn. Definitely broken, possibly worse. But her eyes were open, focused, barely on his face. "You," she whispered. "You pulled me out." "Just rest," Daniel said. "Save your strength." "Who are you?" The question shouldn't have stung, but it did. 5 years working for her company, and she still didn't know his name. Daniel Carter, maintenance supervisor. I was on the plane. Her eyes drifted closed. Everyone else? I don't know. Daniel looked back at the ocean. The wreckage was gone, already swallowed by the waves. If anyone else had survived, he couldn't see them. I don't know. They needed shelter, water, medical supplies. Daniel's emergency response training from his Navy days kicked in, running through priorities. But first, he needed to assess their injuries. His own ribs were definitely broken, at least 2, maybe 3. Every breath hurt, but he could move, could function. Eleanor's head wound was bleeding badly, and that leg needed to be stabilized. Miss Grant, I need to check your injuries. Can you hear me? Eleanor, she muttered. Call me Eleanor. Eleanor, I need to look at your leg. It's going to hurt. She nodded weakly. Daniel gently examined the leg, trying not to cause more damage. The break was bad. Compound fracture, the bone visible through torn skin. If they didn't immobilize it and keep it clean, infection was a certainty. The head wound was still bleeding, but not as badly as it had been. Probably a concussion, definitely needed stitches, but she was conscious and coherent, which was something. We need to get you out of the sun, Daniel said. Can you move at all? I don't think so. He looked around. The beach stretched about 50 yards in either direction before giving way to rocky cliffs. Behind them, dense jungle rose up a slope. No obvious shelter, no signs of civilization. They were alone. Daniel pushed to his feet, swaying with exhaustion. His Navy survival training whispered priorities: shelter, water, fire, food. In that order. First, he needed to get Eleanor somewhere safe. He spotted a cluster of palm trees about 20 yards up the beach, close enough to the jungle for shade but far enough from the water to stay dry. It would have to do. I'm going to carry you, he told Eleanor. This is going to hurt. Everything already hurts. Fair point. Daniel crouched beside her, trying to figure out the best way to move her without causing more damage. Finally, he settled for a fireman's carry, carefully lifting her onto his shoulders. She was lighter than he expected, probably barely over 100 pounds, but every step sent fire through his broken ribs. He gritted his teeth and walked. 20 yards, 19, 18. Eleanor bit back a scream when he jostled her leg. Sorry, he gasped. Almost there. He lowered her as gently as he could into the shade of the palms. She was pale, sweating, trembling with shock. He needed to stabilize her leg, and fast. Stay here, Daniel said. I'm going to look for supplies. Where would I go? Eleanor's attempt at humor came out as a pained whisper. Daniel limped back down to the beach, scanning the shoreline. The ocean was already washing up debris from the crash. He waded into the shallows and started grabbing anything that might be useful. A seat cushion could work as a pillow. A piece of luggage, waterlogged but intact. He dragged it to shore and pried it open. Clothes, toiletries, nothing immediately useful. He kept searching. There, a first aid kit, still sealed in its waterproof case. Daniel grabbed it like a lifeline. More debris washed up. Another suitcase, a laptop bag, pieces of the plane's interior. He gathered what he could and hauled it up to their makeshift camp. Eleanor was watching him through half-closed eyes. You know what you're doing? Navy medic training, 20 years ago, but I remember enough. Daniel opened the first aid kit. Bandages, antiseptic, pain medication, a few other basics. Not much, but better than nothing. This is going to hurt, he warned again, pulling out the antiseptic. A lot. Just do it. He cleaned the head wound first, Eleanor hissing through clenched teeth as the antiseptic burned. The gash was deep, definitely needed stitches, but the bleeding had mostly stopped. He bandaged it as best he could. The leg was worse. Much worse. Daniel found a straight piece of driftwood on the beach and brought it back for a splint. He ripped strips from one of the salvaged shirts to use as ties. I need to straighten the leg before I can splint it, he said quietly. It's going to be bad. Eleanor's face was white. Will I lose it? Not if I can help it, but I need you to stay still no matter what. Can you do that? She nodded. Daniel positioned himself, hands gentle but firm on her leg. He counted down. 3, 2, 1. He pulled. Eleanor's scream echoed across the beach. Birds erupted from the jungle canopy. But the bone shifted back into alignment, and Daniel quickly splinted it, working as fast as he could. When he was done, Eleanor was sobbing quietly, tears streaming down her face. Daniel gave her 2 of the pain pills from the first aid kit and the small bottle of water that had been in the kit. "Rest now," he said. "I need to find us fresh water." Don't leave me here." The fear in her voice was raw, human, not the CEO, not the billionaire, just someone who was hurt and scared and alone. "I'm just going to the tree line," Daniel said. "I'll stay where you can see me, I promise." He walked up the slope into the jungle, moving slowly to favor his ribs. The vegetation was thick, palms, ferns, vines, tropical. That meant rain, which meant fresh water somewhere. He found it 20 yards in, a small stream trickling down through the rocks. Clear, cold, probably safe to drink. Daniel cupped his hands and drank deeply, the water soothing his raw throat. He needed containers. He jogged back to the beach and grabbed the empty first aid case and a water bottle he'd found in one of the suitcases. He filled them both from the stream and carried them back to Eleanor. She drank like she'd been in the desert for days. When she finally stopped, she looked at him with something approaching wonder. "You saved my life." "Twice now," Daniel said. "But who's counting?" She almost smiled. "What happens now?" Daniel looked around their camp. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon. They had shelter, barely. Water, a few supplies. Eleanor was stable for now. But they were stranded on what appeared to be a deserted island in the middle of the Pacific with no way to call for help. "Now," Daniel said quietly, "we survive." Night fell fast in the tropics. Daniel had managed to build a small fire using driftwood and a lighter he'd found in one of the salvaged bags. The flames pushed back the darkness and the chill that came with it. Eleanor slept fitfully, murmuring in fever dreams. Daniel checked her temperature, too high. The leg wound was getting infected despite his best efforts. They needed antibiotics, proper medical care. They needed rescue. Daniel stared out at the dark ocean, watching for lights that never came. The plane had gone down hours ago. Someone would have noticed by now. Flight control, the company, the Coast Guard. They'd be searching, but the Pacific was enormous and they'd been blown off course by the storm. How long would it take to find them? Days, Daniel thought. Maybe weeks. He pulled out his phone, already knowing it was useless. Water damaged, dead, no signal even if it had been working. Eleanor's phone was the same. All the fancy technology in the world, and they were as isolated as castaways from 100 years ago. "Daniel?" He turned. Eleanor was awake, watching him in the firelight. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a plane." She paused. That was supposed to be a joke. "Might need some work." Daniel moved closer, checking her forehead. Still too warm. "How's the pain?" "Manageable. The pills help." She looked at the fire, the dark jungle beyond. "How long have we been here?" "About 6 hours." "It feels like days." She closed her eyes. "Tell me the truth. Are we going to die here?" Daniel thought about lying, but she deserved better. "Not if I can help it, but we're in trouble. Your leg is infected, we need proper medical supplies, antibiotics, and we need rescue." "They'll find us," Eleanor said. "They have to. The company will spare no expense. They'll search the flight path," Daniel interrupted. "But we were blown off course. We could be hundreds of miles from where they think we are." The reality settled between them. Eleanor's expression crumbled just for a moment before she rebuilt the walls. "Then we survive until they find us." "You said you were Navy. You know survival training?" "Some. Enough, I hope." Daniel fed another piece of driftwood to the fire. "We have water. I'll look for food tomorrow. Build a signal fire. Check the beach for more supplies." "What can I do?" "Rest. Heal. That leg is going to take time." "I'm not used to being helpless. I know." Daniel had seen enough of Eleanor Grant to know that control was everything to her. Losing it must be terrifying. They sat in silence, listening to the waves and the night sounds of the jungle. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, lonely, haunting. "Daniel," Eleanor said quietly, "why did you save me?" "What kind of question is that?" "A serious one. You don't know me. I don't even remember ever speaking to you before today. We were both in the water, both in danger. You could have swam for shore alone, saved yourself. Why risk your life for mine?" Daniel stared into the fire, thinking about how to answer. Because that's what you do. When someone needs help, you help them. It's not complicated. It is for most people. Maybe you know the wrong people. Eleanor laughed, a bitter sound. Maybe I do. Maybe I built my whole life around the wrong people. She shifted, wincing at the pain in her leg. The executives on that plane, do you know how many of them would have saved me if the positions were reversed? I don't think it's fair to judge people based on what they might do in a crisis. Isn't it? A crisis shows you who people really are. All the pretense falls away, and you see the truth. She looked at him. You're a good man, Daniel Carter. Better than most. I'm just a guy trying to get home to his daughter. Something changed in Eleanor's expression. You have a daughter? Emma. She's 12. Daniel pulled out his ruined phone, opening it to the lock screen photo. Emma's smiling face, gap-toothed and beautiful, frozen in pixels. She's the reason I have to survive this, the reason I can't give up. Eleanor stared at the photo. She's beautiful. She's everything. Daniel's voice cracked. Her mother died when she was 2. Cancer. It's been just the two of us ever since. If I don't make it back, you will. We both will. Eleanor's voice was firm, the CEO again. Your daughter needs you, and I'm not dying on a beach in the middle of nowhere. That's the spirit. Besides, Eleanor added, you saved my life twice. I owe you a debt. I always pay my debts. Daniel smiled despite himself. Let's focus on surviving first. We can worry about debts later. The fire crackled. The ocean whispered against the shore. Above them, stars filled the sky. More stars than Daniel had ever seen, brilliant and infinite. It's beautiful, Eleanor said softly. I never look at the stars anymore. Too busy, too much work. Yeah, I know the feeling. What do you do when you're not working, besides being a father? That pretty much fills the time. Daniel thought about it. I coach Emma's soccer team, read, try to keep up with 12-year-old energy levels. You sound happy. I am, most days. He paused. What about you? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. I don't think I've been happy in years. Successful, yes. Respected, feared, wealthy beyond measure. But happy? She shook her head. I built an empire and forgot to build a life. It's not too late, isn't it? I'm 53 years old, no family, no real friends, just employees and competitors and people who want something from me. She laughed bitterly. I didn't even know your name, Daniel. You worked for my company for how long? 5 years. 5 years. And I never once learned your name, never said hello, never acknowledged your existence. She closed her eyes. What kind of person does that make me? A busy one? A focused one. Daniel chose his words carefully. Look, I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt, being invisible, but I also understand. You're running a billion-dollar company. You can't know everyone. That's an excuse, and a poor one. Eleanor opened her eyes, looking at him directly. I'm sorry, Daniel, for not seeing you, for not seeing any of the people who keep my company running while I take all the credit. Apology accepted. They fell silent again. The fire was dying down. Daniel added more wood, watching the flames catch and climb. Tell me about your daughter, Eleanor said. Tell me about Emma. So Daniel did. He talked about Emma's love of soccer, her terrible jokes, her determination to rescue every stray animal in the neighborhood, about parent-teacher conferences and school plays, and the 1,000 tiny moments that made up their life together. And as he talked, Eleanor listened. Really listened. Not the surface politeness of a CEO hearing a report, but genuine interest, genuine connection. For the first time since the crash, Daniel felt something other than fear and exhaustion. He felt hope. Morning arrived with the cry of seabirds and the distant crash of waves. Daniel woke stiff and sore, his broken ribs a constant ache. But he was alive. Eleanor was still asleep, her breathing steady. Daniel checked her temperature, still elevated, but not worse. The leg wound would need to be cleaned and rebandaged. First, though, he needed to take stock of their situation. He walked the beach as the sun rose, cataloging what the ocean had brought them. More luggage had washed up overnight. He dragged 4 suitcases above the tide line, a laptop bag, waterlogged and useless. More seat cushions, pieces of the plane's interior, and then he found something that made his heart skip. A bright orange package, partially buried in sand. Daniel dug it out and felt his hands start to shake. An emergency life raft. Deflated, but the canister looked intact. He carried it back to camp, hands trembling. If the raft was functional, they could use it for shelter, storage, maybe even… What is that? Eleanor was awake, propped up on one elbow, watching him. Emergency raft from the plane. If it's not damaged, it might have supplies, food, water, maybe even a beacon. He opened the canister carefully. The raft was torn. A long gash in the side made it useless for flotation. But inside the storage compartments, water bottles, emergency rations, a first aid kit, a real one, with antibiotics, a signal mirror, flares, and a satellite emergency beacon. Daniel pulled it out with shaking hands. The casing was cracked, the display dark. But maybe, just maybe, it still worked. Does it function? Eleanor asked. Daniel pressed the power button. Nothing happened. He tried again, still nothing. I don't know, it's damaged, but I might be able to fix it. He looked at Eleanor. I need to take it apart, see if the transmitter's intact. It's going to take time. Do it. That's our way home. Daniel nodded. But first he needed to take care of Eleanor's leg. He cleaned the wound with fresh water and antiseptic from the new first aid kit, then applied antibiotic ointment. Eleanor gritted her teeth through the process, refusing to cry out. You're tough, Daniel said, rebandaging the leg. I've had to be. You don't build a company like Grant Tech by being soft. There's a difference between being tough and being hard. Eleanor considered that. Which one am I? Both, I think. The toughness got you where you are. The hardness… Daniel trailed off. The hardness made me alone, Eleanor finished. I know, I've known for years. I just didn't know how to change it. Daniel handed her water and pain medication. Maybe this is your chance. Life has a way of forcing change when we won't do it ourselves. Philosophical for a maintenance supervisor. My daughter says I'm full of annoying dad wisdom. That made Eleanor smile, a real smile, the first one Daniel had seen from her. It transformed her face, made her look younger, more human. I like your daughter already. She sounds smart. Too smart. Keeps me on my toes. Daniel left Eleanor to rest and started work on the beacon. He used a small screwdriver from his keychain to open the casing. Inside, the circuit board was corroded from salt water, but the transmitter itself looked intact. If he could clean the corrosion, replace the power source… He worked for hours, focused and methodical. Eleanor watched sometimes, other times slept. When she was awake, they talked. About nothing, about everything. About Emma and Eleanor's estranged sister and the choices that had led them both to this beach. The walls between them were coming down, brick by brick. By afternoon, Daniel had the beacon partially operational. The transmitter was working, but the power cell was shot. He'd need to jury-rig a replacement. How long? Eleanor asked. A day, maybe 2. I need to find the right materials. We have time. Did they? Eleanor's fever was climbing again despite the antibiotics. The leg wound was angry and red. Without proper medical care, infection could turn to sepsis, and then… Daniel pushed the thought away. They had supplies now. Water, food, medicine. He'd build a signal fire, keep working on the beacon, and they'd be rescued. They had to be. He couldn't leave Emma alone. As if reading his thoughts, Eleanor said, Tell me more about her. About Emma. What does she want to be when she grows up? Changes every week. Last month it was a veterinarian. This month she's decided she wants to be a pilot. Daniel's voice caught. Ironic, considering. She sounds brave. She is. Braver than me. Daniel looked out at the ocean. When her mother died, I fell apart. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. But Emma, she was only 2, but she was so strong, like she knew I needed her to be. She saved me in a lot of ways. And now you're going to save us both and get back to her. That's the plan. Eleanor reached out, her hand finding his. Thank you, Daniel, for everything, for saving me, for taking care of me, for giving me hope. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. That's what people do. They help each other. In my world, people usually just help themselves. Then maybe, Daniel said quietly, you've been living in the wrong world. The sun was setting again, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Their second night on the island. They had supplies, they had hope, and they had each other. It would have to be enough. Because somewhere out there, Emma was waiting, and Daniel had made a promise. He was coming home. The next morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost cruel. Daniel woke before dawn, his body protesting every movement. The broken ribs had settled into a constant grinding ache that made breathing an exercise in willpower. But pain meant he was alive, and alive meant he could still fight. Eleanor was worse. He knew it the moment he checked on her. Her skin was hot to the touch, her breathing shallow and rapid. The fever had spiked during the night despite the antibiotics. When he peeled back the bandage on her leg, the smell made his stomach turn. The infection was spreading. Eleanor. He touched her shoulder gently. I need you to wake up. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed and unfocused. Daniel? I'm here. I need to clean your wound again. The infection's getting worse. Can't be worse than yesterday. It is. He didn't sugarcoat it. She deserved the truth. We need to be aggressive with treatment. This is going to hurt more than before. She nodded weakly. Do what you have to do. Daniel gathered supplies from the medical kit. More antiseptic, fresh bandages, the precious few remaining antibiotic pills. He wished desperately for proper surgical tools, for IV antibiotics, for a hospital with clean white walls and doctors who actually knew what they were doing. Instead, he had driftwood and hope. He cleaned the wound as thoroughly as he could, Eleanor biting down on a piece of cloth to keep from screaming. The flesh around the break was angry and swollen, red streaks beginning to creep up her thigh. Sepsis. The word hung in Daniel's mind like a death sentence. Talk to me, Eleanor gasped when he paused to let her catch her breath. Distract me from this. What do you want to talk about? Anything. Everything. Tell me about your worst day before this one. Daniel applied more antiseptic, working carefully. My worst day? That's easy. The day my wife died. Eleanor's breath caught, and not from pain. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's okay. You asked. Daniel's hand stayed steady, even as the memories flooded back. Her name was Sarah. We met in the Navy. She was a communications officer. I was a medic. Married for 6 years before Emma came along. Best years of my life. What happened? Ovarian cancer. Stage 4 by the time they found it. She fought for 18 months, but Daniel shook his head. Emma was too young to really understand. She just knew Mommy was sick, and then Mommy was gone. How did you survive it? Honestly, I don't know. Some days I didn't think I would, but Emma needed me, and that was enough reason to keep going. He finished bandaging the leg and sat back. You find out what you're made of when everything falls apart. You're either stronger than you thought, or you're not. And you were stronger. I didn't have a choice. Eleanor closed her eyes. I've never had to be strong like that. My struggles have all been professional. Hostile takeovers, board challenges, market crashes. Those are easy compared to losing someone you love. Don't sell yourself short. You're strong enough. Look at you. Compound fracture, infected wound, stranded on an island, and you're still fighting. Because you won't let me quit. Damn right I won't. Daniel helped her sip some water. Take these. He handed her the antibiotic pills. We're going to beat this infection, and then we're going home. You sound certain. I have to be. Certainty is all we've got. After Eleanor drifted back into an uneasy sleep, Daniel forced himself to eat one of the emergency rations. It tasted like cardboard and chemicals, but his body needed fuel. He couldn't afford to get weak. He spent the morning searching the beach for more debris. The ocean was still coughing up pieces of their former lives. Expensive luggage that now served as storage containers, tablets and phones that would never work again. A woman's high-heeled shoe that looked absurdly out of place on the sand. Daniel found a metal briefcase that had somehow survived intact. Inside were documents, a tablet, and a small photo frame. He picked up the frame and found himself staring at a much younger Eleanor, standing with another woman who shared her features. Sisters, clearly. Both were smiling, their arms around each other. He brought it back to camp. Eleanor was awake when he returned, staring at the canopy of palm fronds above her. Find anything useful? Maybe. Daniel held out the frame. Found this. Thought you might want it. Eleanor took it with trembling hands. For a long moment, she just stared at the photograph. Then tears began streaming down her face. That's Catherine, my little sister. Her voice broke. We haven't spoken in 12 years. Daniel sat down beside her, waiting. I was so focused on building the company, Eleanor continued. Nothing else mattered. Catherine wanted me to slow down, spend time with family, actually live my life. We fought about it. I said terrible things. She said she was done trying to reach someone who didn't want to be reached. And you never called. I was too proud, too stubborn. I kept telling myself I'd reach out when things calmed down at work, but things never calm down when you're running an empire. She wiped her eyes. Now I'm lying on a beach dying, and she doesn't even know. You're not dying. Daniel, you're not dying because I won't let you, and when we get rescued, you're going to call your sister and fix this. Understand? Eleanor looked at him, something shifting in her expression. You really believe we'll make it? I have to. My daughter is waiting for me. Your sister is out there. We have people who need us to survive. Daniel stood up, wincing at the pain in his ribs. Now I'm going to work on that beacon. You're going to rest and let those antibiotics do their job. He spent the rest of the day hunched over the damaged emergency beacon, trying to coax life from corroded circuits. The main transmitter seemed functional, but without power it was useless. He needed a battery source, something to generate enough electricity to send a distress signal. The problem occupied his mind, pushing back the fear that whispered Eleanor might not make it another day. By late afternoon, he'd had an idea. The laptop batteries from the salvaged briefcase, if he could jury-rig a connection to the beacon's power input, it might work. The voltage would be wrong, but he could potentially step it down using components from one of the damaged phones. It was a long shot. But long shots were all they had. You look like you're performing surgery on that thing, Eleanor said. She'd been watching him work, her fever making her eyes too bright. Close enough. One wrong connection and it's fried. No pressure then. Daniel smiled despite himself. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a plane and then spent 3 days on a beach. She paused. That joke still needs work, doesn't it? Maybe a little. Daniel set down his tools and moved to check her temperature. Still too high, but not higher than this morning. Maybe the antibiotics were finally getting ahead of the infection. Maybe they had a chance. Daniel, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you leave the Navy? You clearly had medical training. You could have been a doctor. Daniel settled back, considering how much to share. After Sarah died, I couldn't do it anymore. Being a medic meant watching people die. And I just watched the person I loved most die slowly over 18 months. I couldn't face that again. So you became a maintenance supervisor. So I became a father first and found a job that let me be there for Emma. Maintenance paid well enough, the hours were flexible, and nobody died if I made a mistake. He looked at her. Turns out medical training comes in handy even when you're not a medic. I'm glad you were on that plane. I'm not glad we crashed, but if we had to crash, I'm glad you were there. Me too. Daniel meant it. As terrifying as this was, as much as he missed Emma, there was something profound about being needed this way again. About using his skills to save a life instead of just fixing air conditioning units. The sun was setting again, their third day bleeding into their fourth. Daniel built up the fire and rationed out their dinner, half an emergency ration bar each, carefully measured. They had food for maybe a week if they were careful. After that, he'd need to figure out how to hunt or fish, one problem at a time. Tell me about Grant Tech, Daniel said as they ate. How did it start? Eleanor looked surprised by the question. You really want to know? We've got time, she smiled slightly. I was 25, working as a junior programmer at a software company that treated me like I was invisible. Sound familiar? Little bit. I had an idea for a new kind of database architecture, more efficient, more scalable. I pitched it to my bosses and they laughed me out of the room. So I quit, maxed out my credit cards, and built it myself in my apartment. That took guts. That took desperation. I was tired of being told I wasn't good enough, smart enough, ambitious enough. I wanted to prove them all wrong. Eleanor stared into the fire. And I did. The software sold, I reinvested the profits, hired a team, and kept building. 28 years later, Grant Tech employs 15,000 people and generates $3 billion in annual revenue. That's incredible. That's obsession. I sacrificed everything for that company. My relationships, my health, my happiness. I told myself it was worth it, that success was enough. She looked at Daniel. But lying on this beach, I realized I don't even know what success means anymore. I built an empire, but I'm alone in it. It's not too late to change that, isn't it? I'm 53 years old. I don't know how to be anything other than the CEO. Then learn. You built a company from nothing. You can rebuild your life the same way. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. You decide what matters, and you chase it the same way you chase success. Daniel fed another stick to the fire. What would you do differently? If we get rescued tomorrow, what changes? When? When we get rescued. When we get rescued, what changes? Eleanor thought about it. I'd call Catherine. Actually apologize, not just send a lawyer with a settlement offer. I'd ask her about her life, her kids, her dreams. I'd try to be a sister again instead of just a name on a Christmas card. That's a good start. What else? I'd learn the names of my employees. All of them, if I could. Starting with the people who actually keep the company running while I take credit. She looked at him. I'd make sure everyone knew they mattered, that they were seen. That would mean a lot. Trust me. They fell into comfortable silence, watching the fire dance. The jungle hummed with night sounds, insects chirping, leaves rustling, distant calls of animals Daniel couldn't identify. Above them, the stars wheeled across the sky, indifferent to human suffering. Do you think they're still searching for us? Eleanor asked quietly. Absolutely. Your company, the FAA, the Coast Guard, they won't stop looking. But they're looking in the wrong place. Daniel couldn't argue with that. The storm had blown them far off course. The search area would be massive, and they were a tiny island in an endless ocean. That's why we need the beacon, he said. Once I get it working, we can send our exact coordinates. They'll come for us. How long? Day or two. Maybe less if I'm lucky. Eleanor closed her eyes. I hope we have a day or two. The unspoken fear hung between them. Her fever, the infection, the very real possibility that time was running out. We do, Daniel said firmly, and I'm going to make sure we use it. The next morning brought new challenges. Eleanor's fever had broken during the night, which was good, but she was weaker, barely able to sit up without help. The infection was draining her strength faster than the antibiotics could fight it. Daniel knew they were in a race now. Get the beacon working and get rescued, or watch Eleanor fade away. He attacked the problem with renewed urgency. The laptop battery connection proved trickier than he'd hoped. The voltage was all wrong, and his first attempt fried one of the phone circuit boards he'd been planning to use as a step-down converter. Damn it, he muttered, tossing the ruined component aside. Problem? Eleanor's voice was weak but alert. Just taking the scenic route to a solution. Daniel forced optimism into his tone. How are you feeling? Like microwave death. Your sense of humor is improving. That's a good sign. Or a sign of delirium. Hard to tell. Daniel brought her water and more antibiotics. They were running low, maybe 2 days of pills left. After that, he'd have to hope the infection was under control. He went back to work on the beacon, approaching the problem from a different angle. Instead of trying to match the voltage perfectly, what if he pulsed the power? Short bursts from the laptop battery, time to give the transmitter just enough juice to send a signal without overloading the circuits. It was risky. One mistake and he'd destroy their only chance at rescue. But doing nothing was a guarantee of death. Daniel worked through the morning, his hands steady, despite the fear churning in his gut. He soldered connections using a small kit he'd found in one of the suitcases, tested circuits with a jury-rigged multimeter, and prayed to a universe that probably wasn't listening. Tell me about Emma's mother, Eleanor said suddenly. What was she like? Daniel glanced up, surprised. Why do you want to know? Because she raised an incredible daughter in the 2 years she had. I want to know about the woman who did that. Daniel set down his tools, accepting the distraction. Maybe he needed a break anyway. She was light. Does that make sense? She walked into a room and everything got brighter. She laughed at terrible jokes, cried during commercials, and believed with absolute conviction that people were fundamentally good. He smiled at the memories. I was more cynical. The Navy had shown me enough darkness to make me doubt humanity. But Sarah saw the best in everyone. She sounds wonderful. She was. When Emma was born, Sarah quit her job to be a full-time mom. She said she didn't want to miss a single moment. Good thing, too, because his voice caught. Because she didn't get many moments, Eleanor finished gently. 18 months after Emma's second birthday, Sarah was gone, and I was left trying to be both parents to a little girl who kept asking when Mommy was coming home. Daniel wiped his eyes. The first year was hell. I barely kept it together. But Emma needed me to be strong, so I learned how. You did more than learn. You thrived. Emma is lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. She saved me in ways I'm still discovering. Eleanor shifted, wincing at the movement. I envy you, not the tragedy, but the love. I've never let anyone that close. Never risked that kind of pain. It's worth it. The pain is worth it for the love. I'm starting to believe you. Daniel returned to the beacon, Eleanor's words echoing in his mind. He thought about Sarah, about Emma, about the life he'd built from the ashes of loss. He thought about Eleanor, realizing she'd spent decades building walls instead of bridges. They were both survivors, just of different kinds of wreckage. By afternoon, Daniel had a working prototype. The laptop battery connected to a pulse circuit built from phone components, feeding carefully timed bursts of power to the beacon's transmitter. In theory, it would work. In practice, there was only one way to find out. Ready? He asked Eleanor. Ready for what? Ready to call for help. He pressed the activation button. Nothing happened. Daniel's heart sank. He checked the connections, verified the circuit, tried again. Still nothing. Maybe the transmitter is completely dead, Eleanor said quietly. No, it has to work. It has to. Daniel refused to accept failure. He took the whole thing apart again, examining each component with desperate focus. There. A loose connection where the battery met the pulse circuit. He resoldered it, his hands shaking slightly. Daniel, take a break. You're exhausted. Can't. We're out of time. No, we don't. Daniel's voice was harsh with fear. Your fever is coming back. I can see it. The infection is winning. We need rescue now, not tomorrow, not next week, now. Eleanor didn't argue. They both knew he was right. Daniel finished the repair and tried one more time. He pressed the button, holding his breath. A tiny green light flickered to life on the beacon's display. Is it working? Eleanor's voice was hopeful. Wait. Daniel held up a hand. The light was blinking in a pattern. Short, short, short. Long, long, long. Short, short, short. SOS. It's transmitting, Daniel breathed. The beacon is transmitting our distress signal. Eleanor started crying. Are you sure? I'm sure. It's sending our coordinates on the emergency frequency. Any ship or plane in range will pick it up. How far is the range? 100 miles, maybe more with the right conditions. Daniel set the beacon down carefully, as if it might break if he breathed on it wrong. We did it. We actually did it. They held each other, two broken people on a beach, laughing and crying with relief. But the celebration was short-lived. As the sun began to set on their fourth day, Eleanor's fever spiked again. She was barely conscious, mumbling words Daniel couldn't understand. The beacon was transmitting. Help was coming. But would it come in time? Daniel spent the night keeping vigil beside Eleanor, cooling her burning skin with wet cloths, forcing water past her cracked lips, and watching the horizon for lights that never appeared. Emma, Eleanor mumbled in her delirium, tell her I'm sorry. You're going to tell her yourself, Daniel said. When we get home, you're going to meet Emma and tell her whatever you want. Promise? I promise. But as the hours crawled past and Eleanor's breathing grew more labored, Daniel wondered if it was a promise he could keep. The beacon blinked steadily in the darkness, sending its desperate message into the void. Someone had to hear it. Someone had to come. Dawn broke on their 5th day with agonizing slowness. Daniel had barely slept, keeping watch over Eleanor's deteriorating condition. Her skin was gray, her breathing shallow and rapid. The infection had spread despite everything he'd done. He was losing her. "Don't you quit on me," Daniel whispered, checking her pulse. Weak, but still there. "Your sister is waiting. Emma is waiting to meet you. Don't you dare quit." Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. "Daniel? I'm here." "Is the beacon still working?" Daniel checked. The green light still blinked steadily. "Still transmitting. Help is coming." "You keep saying that." "Because I believe it." He had to believe it. The alternative was unthinkable. "If I don't make it, you're going to make it." "If I don't," Eleanor continued, her voice barely a whisper, "tell Catherine I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her even when I was too stupid to show it. Tell her yourself, when we get rescued, which will be soon." Eleanor smiled weakly. "You're a terrible liar." "Then it's a good thing I'm telling the truth." Daniel forced himself to eat, to stay strong. He gathered more wood for the signal fire, checked the beacon for the 100th time, and scanned the horizon until his eyes ached. Nothing, just endless ocean and empty sky. He was starting to allow himself to imagine the worst when Eleanor gasped. "Daniel, Daniel, look!" He spun around. Eleanor was pointing at the sky with a shaking hand. There, high above the horizon, a tiny dark shape. An aircraft. Daniel's heart stopped. He grabbed the signal mirror from the emergency kit and angled it toward the plane, flashing reflected sunlight in desperate bursts. "Here! We're here!" he shouted, knowing they couldn't hear but unable to stop himself. The plane kept coming, closer, closer. And then it turned. It was heading straight for them. "They see us," Daniel breathed. "Eleanor, they see us. We're getting rescued." Eleanor was crying, laughing, barely conscious but aware enough to understand. They were saved. The Coast Guard helicopter touched down on the beach 30 minutes later, and Daniel watched through tears as paramedics rushed to Eleanor's side. Professional hands took over, starting IVs, stabilizing her leg, preparing her for transport. "You saved her life," one of the paramedics said to Daniel. "Another day and she wouldn't have made it." "Is she going to be okay?" "She'll need surgery, antibiotics, time to heal, but yeah, she's going to be okay." Daniel collapsed onto the sand, overwhelmed with relief. They'd made it. Against all odds, they'd survived. "Sir, we need to check you out too," another paramedic said, helping him up. "Those ribs look bad." "I'm fine. I just need—" Daniel stopped, suddenly remembering. "My daughter, Emma Carter. She thinks I'm dead. I need to call her." The paramedic handed him a satellite phone. "Make it quick. We need to get you both to a hospital." Daniel's hands shook as he dialed Emma's number. It rang once, twice. "Hello?" The sound of his daughter's voice shattered something inside him. "Emma, baby, it's Dad." Silence. Then a sound like the world ending. His daughter screaming his name, sobbing, barely able to form words. "Dad? Dad, they said you were dead. They said the plane—" "I'm alive, sweetheart. I'm alive and I'm coming home." "Promise? Promise you're really okay?" "I promise. I love you, Emma. I love you so much." "I love you too, Dad. Come home. Please come home." "I will, soon as I can." The paramedic gently took the phone. "We need to go, sir." Daniel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He let them guide him to the helicopter, his eyes finding Eleanor on a stretcher nearby. She was awake, looking at him. Their eyes met across the chaos of rescue, and something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, connection. They'd survived together. Now they had to figure out how to live. The helicopter ride felt surreal, like waking from one nightmare into a different kind of dream. Daniel sat strapped into a jump seat, watching paramedics work on Eleanor while the ocean blurred past beneath them. His broken ribs screamed with every vibration of the rotor blades, but the pain felt distant, unimportant. They were alive. That was all that mattered. "Blood pressure is stabilizing," one of the paramedics called out over the noise. Heart rate still elevated but improving. Eleanor's eyes found Daniel's across the cramped space. She mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." He shook his head. Words weren't enough for what they'd been through together. Language couldn't capture 5 days of survival, of fighting death on a beach while the world searched in all the wrong places. So he just held her gaze and nodded, letting her see the truth written in his expression. "You would have done the same for me." Except they both knew that wasn't true. 5 days ago, Eleanor Grant wouldn't have noticed if Daniel Carter had disappeared from the earth. But the island had stripped away everything except what was real, what was essential. It had shown them both who they could be when titles and hierarchies meant nothing. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset Daniel wore. 20 minutes to Honolulu Medical Center. You folks are going to be fine. Honolulu. They'd crashed somewhere in the Central Pacific, hundreds of miles off course from the Seattle route. The search teams had been looking in completely the wrong area. If Daniel hadn't fixed that beacon, if the Coast Guard patrol hadn't been running exercises in that specific sector, if the timing had been off by even an hour, he forced the thought away. They'd made it. That was enough. The city emerged from the ocean like a mirage, buildings, roads, civilization. Things Daniel had taken for granted, his entire life suddenly seemed miraculous. Running water, electricity, hospitals with actual doctors and clean beds and medicines that didn't come from a battered first aid kit. And somewhere in that city, a phone call was being made to his daughter. The helicopter touched down on the hospital roof with barely a bump. Within seconds, the chaos of emergency medicine swallowed them both. Doctors, nurses, gurneys, voices calling out medical terminology Daniel half remembered from his Navy days. Someone was cutting away his salt-stiffened clothes. Someone else was asking him questions he couldn't quite focus on. "Sir, can you tell me where it hurts?" "Everywhere." "Nowhere." How could he explain that the physical pain was nothing compared to the 5 days of terror, of watching Eleanor slip closer to death while he fought to save her with tools that belonged in a different century? "Ribs," he managed. "Broken ribs, left side." "We're going to get you into radiology, get some images. The cut on your shoulder looks infected." "When did that happen?" Daniel looked down. He hadn't even noticed the gash, probably from the initial crash. It had stopped bleeding days ago, scabbed over, become just another piece of background noise in the symphony of pain. "The crash," he said. "I don't know. It doesn't matter." "It matters to us. We need to make sure—" "Eleanor Grant." Daniel grabbed the doctor's arm. "The woman they brought in with me. How is she?" "She's in surgery right now. Orthopedics is handling the leg, and we've got infectious disease consulting on the sepsis. She's in good hands. Will she make it?" The doctor's expression softened. "You got her here in time. That's what matters. Now let us take care of you both." They wheeled Daniel through fluorescent-lit corridors that felt blindingly bright after days of firelight and sun. The X-ray machine hummed and clicked. A nurse cleaned his wounds with gentle efficiency while he gritted his teeth and tried not to think about doing the same thing to Eleanor with ocean water and hope. 3 broken ribs, multiple lacerations, severe dehydration, and early-stage infection in that shoulder wound, a new doctor announced, reviewing his chart. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Carter." Lucky. Daniel almost laughed. 11 other people had been on that plane. 11 people who were probably at the bottom of the Pacific right now, their families planning funerals while he got to hear his daughter's voice again. "The others," he said quietly. "From the plane. Did anyone else—" The doctor's expression answered before his words did. "You and Ms. Grant were the only survivors we found. I'm sorry." Daniel closed his eyes. He'd known, logically, that no one else could have made it, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that twisted his gut. "We need to admit you for observation," the doctor continued. "Those ribs need monitoring, and we want to make sure the infection doesn't spread. A few days of IV antibiotics and rest, and you should be able to go home." Home. The word hit Daniel like a physical blow. Emma. He needed to see Emma, to hold her, to prove to both of them that he was really alive. "My daughter," Daniel said urgently. "Emma Carter, is she here? Someone needs to bring her here." "We've already contacted your emergency contacts. Your brother is bringing her. They should arrive within the hour." His brother. Daniel had almost forgotten he'd listed Marcus as Emma's guardian if anything happened to him. Marcus, who lived in Honolulu with his wife and 2 kids. Marcus, who must have been going out of his mind for the past 5 days. They settled Daniel into a private room with a view of the ocean, ironic, considering he'd just spent 5 days desperate to get away from it. A nurse hooked him up to an IV, adjusted his bed, and left him alone with his thoughts. The silence was deafening. For 5 days, there had always been something to do. Water to find, fire to maintain, Eleanor to care for, the beacon to fix. Action kept the fear at bay, kept him from falling apart. But now, lying in a clean hospital bed with nothing to do but wait, the full weight of what they'd survived crashed over him. They could have died. Emma could have lost her father. He could have failed to save Eleanor, could have watched her die on that beach despite everything he did. The door burst open and Emma flew into the room like a hurricane. "Dad!" Daniel barely had time to brace himself before she crashed into him, throwing her arms around his neck and sobbing into his shoulder. Pain exploded through his broken ribs, but he didn't care. He wrapped his arms around his daughter and held on like she might disappear if he let go. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." "They said you were dead," Emma choked out between sobs. "Uncle Marcus said the plane crashed and they couldn't find anyone, and I thought, I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Marcus stood in the doorway, his own eyes red and wet. "You stubborn son of a bitch. We searched for 3 days before they called it off. How the hell did you—" "Long story." Daniel met his brother's eyes over Emma's head. "Really long story." Marcus crossed the room and pulled them both into a hug, careful of Daniel's injuries. "We thought we'd lost you, man. Emma's been staying with us, but she wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. Just kept saying you promised you'd come home." "I always keep my promises." Daniel looked down at Emma, brushing tears from her cheeks. "Especially to you." Emma pulled back just enough to study his face, her hands touching his cheeks, his hair, as if confirming he was real. "You look different, skinnier, and you have a beard." 5 days without a razor will do that." 5 days on an island," Marcus said. "The news is going crazy. They're saying you saved Eleanor Grant's life, that you kept her alive with just a first aid kit and whatever you could salvage from the crash." Daniel shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I did what anyone would do." "That's not what the Coast Guard is saying. They're calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero. I'm just a dad who needed to get home to his daughter." Emma hugged him again, more gently this time. "You're my hero. You've always been my hero." The next few hours blurred together. Doctors came and went, checking his vitals and adjusting his medications. A hospital administrator appeared with paperwork and sympathetic smiles. Marcus filled him in on the search efforts, the media coverage, the memorial service that had been planned before the rescue. And through it all, Emma refused to leave his side. She sat in the chair next to his bed, holding his hand, occasionally touching his arm as if to reassure herself he was still there. "Dad, what was it like?" she asked quietly when they were finally alone again. Marcus had gone to get them dinner from the cafeteria. "On the island, I mean." Daniel considered how much to tell her. She was 12, not a little kid anymore, but still his baby. "How did you explain watching someone nearly die? Fighting to survive when every odd was against you?" "It was scary," he said honestly. "And hard. But it taught me some things too." "Like what?" "Like how strong people can be when they have to be. Like how much we can do when someone needs us." He squeezed her hand. "And like how lucky I am to have you waiting for me at home. You're the reason I fought so hard, Emma. Every time I wanted to give up, I thought about you." "I'm glad you didn't give up." "Me too, sweetheart." A soft knock interrupted them. A nurse poked her head in. "Mr. Carter, Miss Grant is out of surgery and asking for you. She's in recovery on the 4th floor if you're feeling up to a visit." Daniel started to sit up, but Emma's grip on his hand tightened. "You're going to see her?" "Just for a minute. She saved my life too in her own way. I need to make sure she's okay." "Can I come?" Daniel hesitated. Eleanor was probably a mess. Post-surgical, drugged, vulnerable in ways a CEO should never be vulnerable. But Emma's eyes were pleading, and he couldn't find it in himself to say no. "Okay, but just for a minute." The nurse brought a wheelchair. Hospital policy, she insisted, despite Daniel's protests that he could walk. Emma pushed him down the corridor to the elevators, chattering about school and soccer and everything he'd missed in the past 5 days. Normal things. Beautifully, wonderfully normal things. Eleanor's recovery room was quiet, machines beeping softly. She looked small in the hospital bed, nothing like the imposing CEO who'd barely acknowledged his existence a week ago. Her leg was elevated and wrapped, IV lines snaking into her arms, but her eyes were clear when they found Daniel. "You came," she said, her voice rough from the breathing tube. "Wouldn't miss it. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a plane and spent 5 days dying on a beach, but alive." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Emma. "And this must be your daughter." Emma stepped forward, suddenly shy. "I'm Emma." "Emma, your father talked about you constantly. I feel like I already know you." Eleanor's smile was genuine, warm in a way Daniel had never seen from her before. "He's very proud of you." "He saved your life," Emma said. "The news said you would have died if it wasn't for him." "They're right. Your father is the bravest, most capable person I've ever met. He refused to let me give up, even when I wanted to." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I owe him everything." "You don't owe me anything," Daniel said quietly. "We survived together. That's what matters." "No, Daniel. You survived and dragged me along with you. There's a difference." Eleanor wiped her eyes with her free hand. "Did they tell you about the others? From the plane?" "Yeah, we were the only ones." Silence settled over the room, heavy with grief for people they'd barely known. The VP of operations who'd been on his phone right up until the engines exploded, the CFO who'd been reviewing quarterly reports, the flight crew who'd tried so hard to save them all. "We're going to have to testify," Eleanor said eventually. "NTSB investigation, probably lawsuits. The families will want answers. Let's worry about that when we're both healed. For now, just focus on getting better." A doctor appeared in the doorway, professional but firm. "Ms. Grant needs rest. The surgery went well, but she'll need extensive physical therapy once the bone starts to heal. We're keeping her for at least a week." Daniel nodded and started to back the wheelchair away, but Eleanor stopped him. "Wait, Daniel, there's something I need to say." She looked at Emma, then back at him. "When we get out of here, when life goes back to normal, I don't want to forget what happened on that island. The person I was before the crash, she was successful but empty. You showed me a different way to live. I want to remember that." "You will," Daniel said. "We both will." "I'm serious. I'm going to change things at Grant Tech. The way we treat people, the culture, all of it. And I'm going to call my sister." Eleanor's voice was fierce despite her weakness. "I'm going to fix what I broke." "Good. She's waiting for you." Emma pushed Daniel back toward his own room, quiet and thoughtful. When they were alone again, she looked at him with those two old eyes that reminded him so much of Sarah. "Dad, do you think you'll stay friends with her, with Ms. Grant?" "I don't know, sweetheart. We come from very different worlds." "But the island changed that, right? That's what she said. She's different now." Daniel thought about Eleanor on the beach, vulnerable and afraid and human. He thought about the conversations they'd had, the walls that had crumbled between them, the understanding they'd reached when nothing else mattered except survival. "Yeah," he said, "I think maybe it did change things." The media found out he was awake by morning. News trucks camped outside the hospital, reporters shouting questions at anyone who entered or left. The hospital administration posted security guards outside Daniel's room and moved him to a more private wing. "Mr. Carter, we'd like to arrange a press conference," a PR representative said, hovering nervously in his doorway. "People are calling you a hero. They want to hear your story." "I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who survived a plane crash." "You saved Eleanor Grant's life using nothing but salvaged supplies and military medical training. The public is fascinated. Grant Tech's stock actually went up when news broke that she survived." Daniel had to bite back a harsh laugh. Of course, the stock went up. Even in crisis, even in survival, it always came back to money. "No press conference," he said firmly. "Not until Eleanor and I can do it together. We survived together, and if there's a story to tell, we'll tell it together." The PR rep looked like she wanted to argue but thought better of it. "I'll relay that to Ms. Grant's team." Marcus appeared after she left, carrying coffee and a stack of newspapers. "You're famous, little brother. Look at this." The front page showed Daniel and Eleanor being loaded into the Coast Guard helicopter, his face grim and exhausted, her hand reaching for his even in unconsciousness. The headline read, "Miracle Rescue. Maintenance Worker Saves CEO in Pacific Crash." Maintenance worker, Daniel muttered. Like that's the important part of who I am. It's the part that makes the story compelling. Billionaire CEO saved by working class employee. It's got everything. Drama, class conflict, unexpected heroism. Marcus set the paper down. Have you talked to Grant Tech yet? About your job? My job? Daniel hadn't even thought about it. Why would I? Daniel, you saved the CEO's life. You're probably getting promoted to VP or something. Maybe a seven-figure thank you bonus. This is life-changing money we're talking about. I don't want their money. I just want to go home and watch Emma's soccer games and fix air conditioning units and live my normal life. Your life is never going to be normal again. Marcus wasn't trying to be cruel, just honest. You're all over the news. Everyone knows your name now. That changes things whether you want it to or not. Daniel hated that his brother was probably right. The privacy he'd always taken for granted was gone, shattered by a plane crash and 5 days on a beach. People would recognize him now, would have opinions about him, would reduce his entire existence to a single headline. I need to see Eleanor, he said, pushing himself up carefully. His ribs protested but held. We need to figure out how to handle this together. He found her in her room, awake and staring at her own stack of newspapers with an expression he couldn't quite read. They're calling you my savior, she said without preamble. Hero maintenance worker saves billionaire from certain death. The narrative practically writes itself. You hate it, don't you? Eleanor looked at him. They're turning our survival into a morality play. The humble worker and the humbled executive. It reduces everything we went through to a neat little story with a lesson attached. Daniel sat down in the chair beside her bed. So what do? We control the narrative before it controls us. One press conference, both of us together, and we tell the truth on our terms. Eleanor's business mind was clearly working again, even through the post-surgical fog. But we do it right. No individual interviews, no competing stories. We speak with one voice. And what's our voice say? That we survived because we worked together. That titles didn't matter on that beach. Only humanity mattered. That we both learned something about what's really important. Eleanor paused. And that we're not going to exploit our survival for publicity or profit. Grant Tech's PR team is going to love that. Grant Tech's PR team doesn't dictate my life anymore. That's one of the things that's changing. Eleanor's voice was firm. I'm serious about this, Daniel. About changing the company culture, about reconnecting with my sister, about actually living instead of just working. But I need your help. My help? Eleanor, I'm a maintenance supervisor. What can I... You can tell me when I'm falling back into old patterns. You can remind me what matters. You can be the voice that doesn't care about my position or my money. She looked at him intently. On that island, you saw me at my most vulnerable. You know who I really am under all the armor. I need someone in my life who knows that person and won't let her disappear again. Daniel thought about it, about the woman he'd pulled from the ocean, the CEO who'd learned to laugh at terrible jokes while fighting sepsis, the human being who'd emerged when all the pretense was stripped away. Okay, he said, but it goes both ways. You keep me honest too. Don't let me hide behind being just a maintenance guy. Don't let me play small because it's comfortable. Deal. Eleanor held out her hand. Daniel shook it, sealing a partnership that made no sense on paper, but felt absolutely right. The press conference was scheduled for 3 days later, giving them both time to heal enough to be presentable. Emma helped Daniel pick out a shirt that didn't make him look like he'd just survived a plane crash, fussing over him like he was going to prom instead of facing a room full of reporters. You're going to be great, Dad, she said, straightening his collar for the 3rd time. I'm going to be terrified. There's going to be like 100 reporters in there. So? You survived 5 days on a deserted island. You can handle some reporters. Emma had a point. After fighting for survival, facing questions from journalists seemed manageable by comparison. The hospital's conference room was packed. Daniel counted at least 50 reporters, plus photographers, camera crews, and what looked like the entire executive team from Grant Tech. Eleanor sat beside him in a wheelchair, her legs still immobilized but her bearing regal despite the hospital gown and blankets. Good afternoon, Eleanor began, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding rooms. Thank you all for coming. Daniel and I want to address what happened, but we're only doing this once. After today, we ask that you respect our privacy as we continue to heal. Questions erupted immediately, reporters shouting over each other. Eleanor held up a hand. We'll tell you what happened, and then we'll take a few questions. But first, I want to make something very clear. She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. Daniel Carter saved my life. Not once, but multiple times over the course of 5 days. He pulled me from the ocean when I was drowning. He treated my injuries with limited supplies and extensive knowledge. He built shelter, found water, and refused to let me give up when I wanted to die. Without him, I would not be here today. That is not hyperbole. That is simple fact. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes. I also want to address the narrative that's been emerging in the media, Eleanor continued. Some of you are portraying this as a story about class. The wealthy CEO saved by the working class employee. But that's not what happened on that island. There were no CEOs or maintenance supervisors on that beach. There were just two people trying to survive. Daniel didn't save me because he worked for me. He saved me because that's who he is. He's the kind of person who sees someone in need and acts without hesitation, without calculating the cost or benefit. Daniel felt his face heating up. This much attention, this much praise, it felt wrong somehow. Now Daniel's going to tell you in his own words what happened, Eleanor said, gesturing to him. Daniel cleared his throat, suddenly aware of dozens of eyes on him. I'm not great at public speaking, so bear with me. The plane went down fast. 1 minute we were flying to Seattle, the next minute we were in the ocean. I pulled Ms. Grant, Eleanor, from the wreckage and swam to the nearest land I could see. It turned out to be a small island, uninhabited as far as we could tell. He walked them through the basics, the injuries, the limited supplies, the struggle to stay alive while waiting for rescue. He left out the personal conversations, the moments of vulnerability, the gradual breaking down of walls between them. Those weren't for public consumption. On the 4th day, I managed to repair an emergency beacon we'd found in a damaged life raft. The transmitter started working, and the Coast Guard picked up our signal. They rescued us the next morning. Daniel paused. 11 other people were on that plane. They didn't make it. Eleanor and I are only here because of luck, timing, and the Coast Guard's incredible search efforts. We're not heroes, we're just the ones who survived. Mr. Carter, a reporter jumped up. Is it true you used your Navy medical training to perform emergency surgery on Ms. Grant's leg? I set a broken bone and cleaned a wound. That's not surgery, that's basic first aid. But you had no proper equipment. I had enough. Barely, but enough. Ms. Grant, another reporter, how has this experience changed your perspective on life? On your company? Eleanor's expression became thoughtful. It's changed everything. When you're lying on a beach wondering if you're going to die, you realize how little most of our daily concerns actually matter. The quarterly reports, the board meetings, the constant drive for more profit, it all becomes noise. What matters is the people around you, the connections you make, the lives you touch. So you're stepping down as CEO? Absolutely not. But I'm changing how I lead. I'm implementing new policies to ensure every employee at Grant Tech feels valued and seen. I'm establishing a foundation in honor of the 11 people who died in the crash to support their families and causes they cared about. And I'm personally committing to be more present, more connected, and more human. The questions continued for another 20 minutes until the hospital administrator finally called time. Daniel felt exhausted, wrung out from the attention and the emotional weight of recounting their survival. But as they wheeled Eleanor back to her room and Emma appeared to walk beside him, Daniel felt something else too. Relief. They'd told their story. They'd controlled the narrative. And maybe, just maybe, they could start moving forward now. You did great, Eleanor said when they reconvened in her room. Emma had gone with Marcus to get lunch, leaving them alone. I felt like an idiot. You were authentic, that's what mattered. Eleanor shifted in her wheelchair, wincing. Daniel, I meant what I said about changing the company. I want you to be part of that. I already have a job. I'm offering you a better one. Director of Workplace Culture. You'd work directly with me to reshape how Grant Tech treats its employees, from the executive suite to the maintenance department. Daniel stared at her. Eleanor, I'm not qualified for... You're the most qualified person I know. You understand what it's like to be invisible in a company, to be overlooked and undervalued. That's exactly the perspective I need. She leaned forward. Please, help me fix what's broken. Help me build something better. I need to think about it. Talk to Emma. This would change our whole lives. I know. Take all the time you need. The offer stands. Daniel left her room with his head spinning. Director of Workplace Culture. It was the kind of position he'd never even dreamed of, the kind of opportunity that could change everything for him and Emma. But it would mean stepping into Eleanor's world permanently, becoming part of the machine he'd always watched from the outside. Was he ready for that? Dad, you okay? Emma asked when he met her in the hallway. You look like you saw a ghost. Just thinking about the future, sweetheart. Good future or scary future? Daniel pulled her into a one-armed hug. Maybe both. 2 weeks after the rescue, Daniel stood in his apartment kitchen making breakfast for Emma, trying to pretend that everything was normal. The doctors had released him after 6 days of observation, prescribing rest and follow-up appointments he had mostly ignored. His ribs were healing, the infections had cleared, and physically he was almost back to himself. Mentally was a different story. Every night he woke up gasping, convinced he was drowning. Every sudden noise made him flinch, his body remembering the explosion that had torn the plane apart. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ocean swallowing the wreckage, taking 11 people down into darkness. Emma appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school in jeans and her soccer team hoodie. You're making too many pancakes again. Daniel looked down at the griddle. She was right. He'd made at least a dozen, enough to feed 4 people. Old habits from the island, where every meal had to be rationed and planned. Guess I got carried away. Want to invite some friends over after school? Dad, it's Tuesday. Nobody hangs out on Tuesday. Emma grabbed the orange juice from the fridge. Are you going to Grant Tech today? Just to clear out my locker. Get my personal stuff. Daniel flipped a pancake, not meeting her eyes. Then I'm taking some time off. The company gave me paid leave while I figure things out. You mean while you figure out if you're taking Ms. Grant's job offer? His daughter was too perceptive by half. Yeah, that too. Emma sat down at their small kitchen table, the same one where they'd eaten breakfast together for the past 10 years. Can I say something without you getting all dad defensive? When have I ever been dad defensive? Literally every time I try to give you advice. But she was smiling. I think you should take it. The job, I mean. Daniel brought over a plate of pancakes and sat down across from her. Why? Because you've been different since you came back. Not bad different, good different. Like you remember you're allowed to be more than just my dad. Emma poured syrup with the careful precision of someone who'd been lectured about sugar intake. Don't get me wrong, I love that you're my dad, but you're also Daniel Carter, who saved someone's life and fixed a broken beacon with laptop batteries and survived 5 days on a beach. That person should probably do more than fix air conditioners. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just notice more now. She took a bite of pancake, then looked at him seriously. I heard you last night. The nightmare. You were yelling about the water. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He tried so hard to hide the nightmares from her, to keep his trauma from becoming her burden. I'm okay, sweetheart. It's just, it takes time to process something like that. I know. Uncle Marcus said you might want to talk to someone, like a therapist. Emma said it casually, but Daniel could see the worry in her eyes. I think that's a good idea. You do? Yeah, Mom used to say that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You taught me that too, after she died. So maybe you should listen to your own advice. Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. When did you become the parent in this relationship? Someone has to be. But she was grinning now. So you'll think about it? The therapy and the job? I'll think about it. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Coffee this morning? I have something I want to discuss. My place at 10? Emma read it over his shoulder. That's not weird at all. The billionaire CEO inviting you to her house. She probably wants to pressure me about the job offer. Or maybe she just wants to see you. You guys did survive a plane crash together. That probably creates a bond. Emma stood up, grabbing her backpack. I gotta go or I'll miss the bus. But Dad, whatever you decide about the job, I support you, We'll figure it out together. She kissed his cheek and was gone, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts and far too many pancakes. Eleanor's house turned out to be a massive estate in the hills overlooking the city. Daniel drove through gates that probably cost more than his car, past manicured gardens and a fountain that belonged in a museum. A uniformed housekeeper answered the door and led him through rooms that could have housed his entire apartment building. He found Eleanor on a terrace overlooking the ocean, her leg propped up on an ottoman, a laptop balanced on her knees. She looked up when he approached, and for just a moment, Daniel saw past the CEO to the woman he'd kept alive on a beach. "Daniel, thank you for coming." She closed the laptop. "Coffee, tea, something stronger?" "Coffee's fine. How's the leg?" "Healing. Physical therapy is brutal, but the doctors say I should have full mobility eventually." Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit, please. You're making me nervous standing there like you're about to run away." Daniel sat, accepting a cup of coffee from the housekeeper who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. "Nice place." "It's a monument to success and loneliness. I bought it 5 years ago, and I've barely spent any time here." Eleanor looked out at the ocean. "Funny how you can own a view like this and never really see it until you've spent 5 days staring at the horizon, hoping for rescue." "Is that why you wanted to see me? To discuss real estate philosophy?" "No. I wanted to see you because you're the only person who understands what we went through. Everyone else sees the headlines, the miracle rescue, the inspirational story. But you know what it really was? Terrifying and painful and real." Daniel took a sip of coffee. It was perfect, probably cost more per pound than he made in a day. "The nightmares?" "Every night. I wake up choking, convinced I'm drowning. My therapist says it's normal, that it'll fade with time." Eleanor met his eyes. "Are you having them too?" "Yeah, Emma heard me last night. She suggested I talk to someone." "Your daughter is very smart." "Too smart. Runs in her mother's side of the family." Daniel set down his coffee cup. "Eleanor, what is this really about? You didn't invite me here just to compare trauma notes." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her own cup. "I called my sister, Catherine, the day after the press conference." "How did it go?" "She hung up on me the first time, called back an hour later crying. We talked for 3 hours. Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. "She thought I was dead. The crash was all over the news, and she thought she'd lost her chance to ever make things right. When she found out I survived, she said it felt like getting a second chance she didn't deserve." "But you both deserved it." "Maybe. We're meeting for lunch next week. She's flying in with her kids. My niece and nephew, who I've never met. I'm terrified." Daniel smiled. "Good. Being terrified means it matters." "Is that Navy wisdom or dad wisdom?" "Both, probably." Daniel looked at her carefully. "You're doing it, Eleanor. Actually changing. I'm proud of you." "Don't be proud yet. I haven't actually changed anything at Grant Tech. The board is fighting me on every policy reform I propose. They think I've lost my edge, that the crash made me soft." Eleanor's expression hardened. "They're calling for a vote of no confidence." "Can they do that?" "If they get enough board members on their side, they can remove me as CEO. Everything I built, everything I'm trying to fix, it could all be taken away because I finally learned to see people as human beings instead of assets." Daniel felt anger rise in his chest. "Who's leading the charge?" "Richard Morrison, VP of Operations. He was supposed to be on that flight, but switched at the last minute. He's been positioning himself as my replacement for years, and now he sees his chance." Eleanor looked at Daniel. "This is why I need you, not just as director of workplace culture, but as someone who understands what really matters. Someone who won't let me compromise my values just to keep my position. Eleanor, I'm not qualified to fight corporate battles. You're qualified to remind me why I'm fighting them. That's what I need." She leaned forward. "The board meeting is in 2 days. I want you there. As my advisor, my partner, my friend. I don't care about the title. I just need someone in that room who knows the real me, not the version they've built up in their heads." Daniel thought about Emma's words that morning, about being more than just a dad, about the person who'd survived the island deserving to do more than fix air conditioners. "Okay," he said, "I'll be there, but I'm not promising to stay quiet if I disagree with you. I'm counting on you not to." The Grant Tech board meeting was held in a conference room that probably cost more to furnish than Daniel's annual salary. 20 board members sat around a massive table, all expensive suits and carefully neutral expressions. Daniel felt ridiculously out of place in his department store blazer, but Eleanor had insisted he sit beside her at the head of the table. Richard Morrison sat directly across from them, his smile predatory. "Eleanor, so glad you could join us. And you've brought company. This is Daniel Carter, who will be joining Grant Tech as Director of Workplace Culture. Daniel, Richard Morrison, VP of Operations." "We've met," Daniel said quietly. He remembered Morrison from the employee meetings, the kind of executive who looked through maintenance workers like they were invisible. Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course," the hero. "Tell me, Mr. Carter, what exactly qualifies you to advise on corporate culture? Your extensive experience changing air filters." "Richard," Eleanor's voice could have cut glass. "Daniel is here because I asked him to be. If you have a problem with that, we can address it after we handle the actual business." "Oh, but this is the actual business, Eleanor." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Your judgment, your fitness to continue leading this company. Surely, Mr. Carter's presence, a maintenance worker with no business experience suddenly advising the CEO, demonstrates exactly what we're concerned about." Murmurs around the table. Some board members looked uncomfortable. Others nodded in agreement. Eleanor started to respond, but Daniel touched her arm gently. "May I?" She looked surprised, but nodded. Daniel stood up, facing Morrison directly. "You're right, I don't have business experience. I've never run a department or managed a budget or sat in a boardroom making decisions that affect thousands of lives. What I have done is keep another human being alive when every odd was against us. I've made decisions where failure meant death, and I've learned that the most important skill in any crisis is the ability to see people as people, not numbers on a spreadsheet." "Very touching," Morrison said. "But this isn't a deserted island. This is a multi-billion-dollar corporation." "You're right again. It's bigger, more important, which means the stakes are higher when you fail to treat people with basic dignity." Daniel looked around the table. "I worked for this company for 5 years. In that time, exactly 2 executives ever learned my name. One of them is sitting next to me. The other died in the crash. That tells me something about Grant Tech's culture, and it's not good." "So we should run the company based on feelings instead of results?" Morrison's tone was mocking. "You should run the company understanding that people who feel valued work harder, stay longer, and build better products. That's not feelings. That's economics." Daniel sat down. "But what do I know? I just change air filters." Silence around the table. Then one of the board members, an older woman Daniel didn't recognize, spoke up. "Mr. Carter makes a valid point. Employee retention has been a growing problem. Exit interviews consistently cite lack of recognition and poor workplace culture." "Which is exactly why I'm proposing these reforms," Eleanor said, seizing the opening. "Mandatory recognition programs, transparent promotion pathways, wage increases for our lowest paid workers. These aren't radical ideas. They're basic respect." Morrison shuffled papers. "These reforms will cost the company $40 million annually. That's profit directly off the bottom line. Our shareholders won't accept it." "Our shareholders care about long-term sustainability, not just quarterly earnings," Eleanor countered. "Employee turnover costs us nearly $80 million a year. These reforms will cut that in half while building a stronger, more loyal workforce." The debate continued for over an hour. Morrison attacked every proposal, twisting Eleanor's words and questioning her judgment. Other board members jumped in, some supporting Eleanor, others clearly siding with Morrison. Daniel watched it all, recognizing the power dynamics at play. This wasn't really about policy reforms. This was about Morrison trying to take Eleanor's position, using her compassion as evidence of weakness. Finally, Morrison played his trump card. "Let's be honest about what's really happening here," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Eleanor survived a traumatic experience, that's clear. But trauma changes people, and not always for the better. These reforms, this sudden obsession with employee feelings, this friendship with Mr. Carter, it's all evidence that Eleanor isn't thinking clearly. She needs time to recover, and we need leadership that isn't compromised by personal crisis. How dare you? Eleanor started, but Morrison cut her off. I'm calling for a vote. The board should determine whether Eleanor Grant is fit to continue as CEO or whether we need interim leadership while she recovers from her ordeal. The room erupted. Board members arguing, voices rising, accusations flying. Daniel saw Eleanor's face go pale, saw the moment she realized Morrison might actually win this. He stood up and his voice cut through the chaos. Stop. All of you, just stop. The room fell silent. Everyone staring at the maintenance worker who dared to interrupt their corporate theater. You want to talk about fitness to lead? Let's talk about it. Daniel looked directly at Morrison. On that island, Eleanor had every reason to give up. She was injured, infected, in constant pain. She could have just closed her eyes and let go. Nobody would have blamed her. But she fought. Every single day, she fought. Not because it was easy or profitable or politically smart. She fought because she promised she would survive and come home and fix what was broken in her life. Daniel turned to address the full board. That's leadership. Not the kind that looks good in press releases, but the kind that matters when everything falls apart. Eleanor learned something on that beach that every single person in this room needs to understand. People are not assets to be managed. They're human beings who deserve to be seen and valued. If you can't understand that, if you think compassion is weakness, then you don't deserve to make decisions about this company. This is highly irregular. Morrison began, but Daniel wasn't finished. You know what else is irregular? 11 people died in that crash. 11 colleagues, employees, human beings with families and dreams and lives that mattered. And the only thing this company has done is issue a press release and move on. Where's the memorial? Where's the support for their families? Where's the acknowledgement that we lost people, not just passengers on a flight manifest? Eleanor was staring at him, tears streaming down her face. Around the table, several board members looked ashamed. Eleanor's reforms aren't about feelings, Daniel said quietly. They're about building a company that honors the people who died by treating the people who lived with the respect they deserve. If you can't support that, then maybe you're the ones who aren't fit to lead. He sat down, his heart pounding. He'd probably just ended any chance of working at Grantech, but he couldn't stand by and watch them tear Eleanor apart for finally becoming the leader she should have been all along. Morrison looked like he'd swallowed something toxic. This is completely out of line. Mister, Carter has no standing in this meeting, no vote, no authority to— He has my authority, Eleanor said, her voice steady now. And he's right, about all of it. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to vote on 2 things today. First, my policy reforms. Every single one of them. Second, a memorial fund for the 11 people who died in that crash. $1 million per family, plus full college scholarships for any children. Both proposals are non-negotiable. Eleanor, that's over $20 million. It's the right thing to do. And if this board can't support doing the right thing, then I don't want to lead it anyway. Eleanor looked around the table. So, vote. Vote on the reforms, vote on the memorial fund, and vote on my leadership. But know that if you remove me, I'll make sure every media outlet in the country knows exactly why. I'll tell them that Grantech chose profit over people, that you decided compassion was a liability. See how that plays with shareholders. Morrison's face went red. That's blackmail. That's honesty. Something this company could use more of. The vote took 20 minutes. When it was done, Eleanor's reforms had passed by a narrow margin. The memorial fund passed unanimously. Even Morrison couldn't justify voting against it publicly, and the no-confidence vote failed. Eleanor kept her position, but only just. Walking out of the building afterward, Daniel felt wrung out. Eleanor moved slowly on her crutches, her face exhausted but triumphant. You didn't have to do that, she said. Stand up for me like that. You could have stayed quiet. I could have. But what kind of friend would that make me? Friend? Eleanor tested the word like it was foreign. I don't think I've had a real friend in 20 years. Well, you have one now, whether you like it or not. They reached the parking lot, and Eleanor stopped, turning to face him. Daniel, I meant what I said in there. I need you at Grantech, not just because you're good at calling out corporate nonsense, but because you make me better. You remind me who I want to be. I still don't know if I'm qualified. Stop saying that. Eleanor's voice was fierce. You're the most qualified person I know. You have integrity, compassion, and the courage to speak truth when everyone else stays silent. That's worth more than any business degree. Daniel thought about Emma, about the life they'd built together, about the safety of being invisible in a world that rarely noticed him. Then he thought about the island, about fixing that beacon with nothing but determination and hope, about refusing to let Eleanor give up even when giving up would have been easier. "Okay," he said. "I'll take the job, but I have conditions." "Name them." "I still coach Emma's soccer team. I still make it to parent-teacher conferences. And if I see this company slipping back into old patterns, I call it out, even if it makes people uncomfortable. Especially if it makes people uncomfortable." Eleanor held out her hand. "Welcome to Grant Tech, Director Carter." Daniel shook her hand, feeling like he was stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. But then again, he'd survived worse. That evening, Daniel took Emma out for dinner at her favorite restaurant, a small Italian place that served pizza the size of car tires. She ordered her usual pepperoni and listened while he explained about the board meeting, the job offer, and his decision to accept. "So you're going to be an executive?" Emma's eyes were wide. "Not exactly an executive, more like a bridge between the executives and everyone else." "That's so cool, Dad. Does this mean we're going to be rich?" "The salary is significant. We'll be comfortable. But we're not changing who we are, okay? Same apartment, same life, just with a little more security." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why did you really take the job? Was it because Ms. Grant needed you, or because you needed it?" Daniel set down his pizza, impressed once again by his daughter's insight. "Both, maybe. I spent a long time being invisible, sweetheart. Safe and comfortable, but invisible. The crash showed me I could be more than that. This job, it scares me, but it also feels like maybe it's what I'm supposed to do. Mom would be proud of you." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. "You think so?" "I know so. She always said you were capable of amazing things. She'd be happy you finally believe it too." Emma reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you, Dad. For saving Ms. Grant, for standing up to those board members, for being brave enough to change. That's pretty awesome." "You're pretty awesome yourself, you know that?" "Obviously, I learned from the best." They finished dinner talking about Emma's upcoming soccer tournament, her science project on ocean ecosystems, ironic timing given recent events, and her plans for summer break. Normal things, everyday things, the beautiful mundane details of life that Daniel had fought so hard to get back to. Later, lying in bed that night, Daniel thought about the journey from that burning plane to this moment, about pulling Eleanor from the ocean, keeping her alive on a beach, fighting for survival when every odd was against them. He thought about the 11 people who hadn't made it home, the lives cut short, the families left behind, the futures stolen by mechanical failure and bad luck. And he thought about Eleanor's memorial fund, about the policy reforms that would change lives for Grant Tech's 15,000 employees, about using their survival for something meaningful instead of just moving on. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Daniel typed back, "You would have found a way. You always do." "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. See you Monday, partner." Partner, Director of Workplace Culture. A bridge between worlds, a voice for the invisible, a reminder of what really mattered. Daniel set down his phone and closed his eyes, waiting for the nightmares to come. They did, as they had every night since the rescue. The ocean, the explosion, the desperate swim to shore. But this time, when he woke up gasping, he didn't feel only fear, he felt purpose. Daniel's first day as Director of Workplace Culture started at 7 in the morning with a phone call from Richard Morrison. "Carter, we need to talk. My office, 30 minutes. The line went dead before Daniel could respond. He stared at his phone, already regretting his decision. Emma had left for school 20 minutes earlier, excited about her dad's new job and oblivious to the corporate warfare he was walking into. He arrived at Grant Tech headquarters with 15 minutes to spare, still getting used to parking in the executive lot instead of the employee garage 3 blocks away. The building felt different now, less imposing, more like a challenge he was finally ready to face. Morrison's office was on the top floor, all glass walls and modernist furniture that probably cost more than Daniel's car. The VP sat behind his desk like a king on a throne, his expression cold and calculating. "Close the door," Morrison said without preamble. Daniel did, remaining standing. He'd learned enough about power dynamics to know that sitting would put him at a disadvantage. "Let's be clear about something," Morrison began. "I don't like you. I don't like what you represent, and I definitely don't like Eleanor's decision to bring you into leadership. But she won the board vote, so here we are. I appreciate the honesty. Don't patronize me. You got lucky on a beach, Carter. That doesn't make you qualified to reshape this company's culture. You have no business experience, no management training, and no understanding of how corporations actually function." Daniel felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level. "You're right. I don't have experience running departments or managing budgets. What I do have is 10 years watching this company treat employees like disposable assets. I know which policies drive good people away and which managers create toxic environments because I've lived it. That's the experience Eleanor needs. Eleanor is making emotional decisions based on trauma. She'll realize that eventually, and when she does, you'll be gone." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "But until then, stay out of my department. Operations run smoothly because I don't coddle workers or waste time on feelings. If you try to interfere, I'll make sure every executive in this building knows you're a liability." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. Welcome to Grant Tech, Director Carter. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly." Daniel left Morrison's office with his hand shaking, not from fear, but from anger. He'd known there would be resistance, but the VP's open hostility was something else entirely. He found Eleanor in her new ground floor office. She'd moved down from the executive suite, citing her leg injury, but really making a statement about accessibility. The new space had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the employee break area instead of the city skyline. "Morrison paid me a visit," Daniel said, closing the door behind him. Eleanor looked up from her laptop, her expression darkening. "Let me guess. He tried to intimidate you." "Succeeded a little bit, if I'm honest." "Don't let him get to you. Richard is old guard. He thinks showing weakness means showing humanity, but he's wrong, and we're going to prove it." Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit. We have work to do." For the next 3 hours, they mapped out the implementation of Eleanor's reforms, recognition programs that would highlight employee achievements, transparent promotion pathways so people knew exactly what they needed to advance, wage increases targeting the lowest paid workers, the ones who kept the company running but rarely got acknowledged. "This is going to make a lot of executives uncomfortable," Daniel warned, reviewing the budget allocations. "Good. Comfortable executives get complacent. We need people who are willing to be challenged." Eleanor marked up a proposal with quick, decisive strokes. "I want you to start with the maintenance department. They're your people. They'll trust you. Show us what real culture change looks like on a small scale, then we'll expand it company-wide." Daniel thought about his former colleagues, the men and women who'd worked beside him for 5 years. They'd be skeptical of him now, suspicious of his sudden elevation to management. He'd have to earn their trust all over again. "I can do that," he said. "But I want to start with something else first." "What?" "The memorial for the 11 who died." Daniel pulled out his phone, showing Eleanor the notes he'd been making. "I've been researching their families, their lives. We should honor each of them individually, not just throw money at the problem and call it solved." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, reading through his notes. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "You're right. Absolutely right. Let's make it happen." The memorial service was held 3 weeks later in Grant Tech's main auditorium. Daniel had worked with each victim's family to understand who they'd lost, what mattered to them, what legacy they wanted remembered. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant who'd been working toward her pilot's license. Marcus Washington, the VP of Finance who'd coached Little League in his spare time. Jennifer Alvarez, the young marketing associate who'd been planning her wedding. 9 others, each with their own stories, their own dreams, their own people left behind to grieve. The auditorium was packed. Employees, family members, media. Daniel stood backstage with Eleanor, both of them nervous. "I've given hundreds of presentations," Eleanor said, smoothing down her dress. "Why am I so terrified?" "Because this one matters more than quarterly reports. You're speaking too, you know. The families specifically asked for you." Daniel's stomach dropped. Eleanor, I can't. You can. You were there. You survived when they didn't. They need to hear from you. So when Eleanor finished her remarks, heartfelt and genuine, so different from the corporate platitudes she would have delivered a month ago, Daniel walked to the podium on shaking legs. He looked out at the sea of faces and saw the families in the front rows, parents who'd lost children, children who'd lost parents, spouses suddenly alone. His hands gripped the podium until his knuckles went white. I didn't know most of the people on that plane, he began, his voice barely steady. I saw them in passing, shared a few words, nothing more. But in the moments before the crash, I saw something else. I saw Marcus Washington helping a younger colleague with his seatbelt when the turbulence hit. I saw Sarah Chen staying calm, trying to help passengers even as the plane was going down. I saw Jennifer Alvarez holding hands with the person next to her, offering comfort in those final seconds. Daniel paused, fighting to maintain composure. These weren't just employees or colleagues, they were human beings who showed courage and compassion when it mattered most. They deserved to survive. The fact that they didn't, the fact that I did, that's something I'll carry for the rest of my life. He looked at Eleanor, then back at the families. But I can promise you this, Eleanor and I are going to make sure their deaths meant something. We're changing this company to reflect the values those 11 people embodied: compassion, integrity, humanity. We're building a culture where every person matters, where everyone is seen and valued. That's their legacy. That's how we honor them. There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. Afterwards, family members approached Daniel and Eleanor. Some crying, some angry, all of them grieving. But they thanked Daniel for his words, for seeing their loved ones as people instead of statistics. Jennifer Alvarez's fiancé hugged him for a long moment, whispering, "Thank you for remembering her." It was one of the hardest days of Daniel's life, but also one of the most important. The culture transformation at Grant Tech didn't happen overnight. It took months of grinding work, of fighting resistance from executives like Morrison, of convincing skeptical employees that the changes were real and permanent. Daniel started with the maintenance department, just as Eleanor had suggested. He held town halls where workers could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. He implemented a recognition program that highlighted exceptional work and was shocked to discover how many employees had never been thanked for anything in years of service. You fixed my HVAC unit in under an hour during the heat wave last summer, Daniel told Marcus Kim, a maintenance worker he'd worked alongside for 3 years. That kept the entire R&D department from losing a week of work. Did anyone ever thank you for that? Marcus looked uncomfortable with the attention. It's just my job. It's excellence, and it deserves recognition. Daniel handed him a certificate and a bonus check. Thank you, Marcus. The company sees you. Word spread. Slowly at first, then faster. Employees in other departments started asking when they'd get similar programs. Managers who'd been dismissive began paying attention when they saw productivity increases in Daniel's pilot programs. Even Morrison had to grudgingly acknowledge the results when employee retention in the maintenance department hit a 5-year high. But the real breakthrough came 4 months after Daniel started, when Eleanor called him into her office with an unusual request. "I want you to meet someone," she said, gesturing to the woman sitting across from her desk. Daniel recognized her immediately from the photograph he'd found in the briefcase on the island. Catherine Grant looked like a softer version of her sister. Same sharp features, but warmer somehow, more open. "Catherine, this is Daniel Carter. Daniel, my sister Catherine." They shook hands, Catherine's grip firm and genuine. "So you're the man who saved my sister's life. I'm the man who happened to be there when she needed help. Eleanor told me you'd say something like that." Catherine smiled. "She also told me you convinced her to call me. That makes you responsible for our reconciliation, which means I owe you everything." "You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad you're both talking again." The three of them had lunch together, not at some expensive restaurant, but at the employee cafeteria Eleanor had started eating at regularly. Workers did double takes seeing the CEO sitting among them, but Eleanor handled it with grace, learning names and asking about people's lives. "This is your influence," Catherine said quietly to Daniel, while Eleanor chatted with a custodial worker. "The Eleanor I knew would never have done this. She's different now. Better." "The island changed both of us," Daniel admitted. showed us what really matters. She told me about the nightmares, the trauma. Are you getting help for that? Daniel nodded. He'd started therapy 3 weeks after starting the new job, finally taking Emma's advice. The sessions were hard, forcing him to confront the survivor's guilt and the terror that still woke him at night. But they were helping. Good. Eleanor is too. We grant women aren't great at asking for help, but she's learning. Catherine looked at her sister with obvious affection. Thank you, Daniel, for giving me my sister back. The 6-month mark brought Eleanor's follow-up board review. Morrison had been building a case against her reforms, documenting costs and questioning every decision. But Daniel had been documenting too: retention rates, productivity increases, employee satisfaction scores that had jumped 30% in departments that had implemented the new programs. The night before the meeting, Eleanor called Daniel at home. Emma was at a sleepover, leaving him alone with leftover pizza and growing anxiety. I need you there tomorrow, Eleanor said without preamble. Morrison is going to push hard. He's got numbers that make the reforms look expensive and my leadership look weak. Your leadership isn't weak. You're the strongest person I know. I don't feel strong right now. I feel like I'm back on that beach, fighting an infection I can't beat. Eleanor's voice cracked. What if he wins, Daniel? What if they remove me and undo everything we've built? Then we fight harder. And if we lose, we find another way to make a difference. But Eleanor, we're not going to lose. The numbers are on our side, the employees are on our side, and you're not the same person who went into that first board meeting 6 months ago. Neither are you. Exactly. We both survived worse than Richard Morrison. We can handle one more board meeting. The next morning, Daniel arrived early to find Eleanor already in the conference room, reviewing her presentation. She looked tired but determined, her leg brace gone now, walking with only a slight limp. Ready? He asked. Ready as I'll ever be. The board filed in, Morrison among them, his expression confident. He thought he had this won. Daniel could see it in the way he carried himself, the smug certainty of someone who'd never had to fight for survival. Eleanor began her presentation, walking the board through 6 months of data. The retention improvements, the productivity gains, the employee satisfaction increases. She showed them testimonials from workers who'd been ready to quit, but stayed because they finally felt valued. Then she showed them the financial impact. Yes, the reforms had cost $40 million, but reduced turnover had saved $60 million. Increased productivity had generated another $30 million in value. The company was stronger, more stable, and more profitable than it had been before the crash. Morrison tried to poke holes in the data, questioning methodology and suggesting correlation didn't equal causation. But Daniel had anticipated every argument, had built the case too solidly to dismantle. The bottom line, Eleanor concluded, is that treating people with dignity isn't just the right thing to do. It's good business. We're proving that culture change drives financial results. And we're just getting started. She sat down, and Daniel saw several board members nodding. But Morrison wasn't finished. Impressive presentation, he said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. But let's talk about what's really happening here. Eleanor has built a cult of personality around her crash survival. She's positioned herself as the CEO who learned compassion, and she's using that narrative to push policies that feel good but ultimately weaken this company. Richard? Eleanor started, but Morrison cut her off. I'm not finished. The truth is, we don't need to spend $40 million making employees feel special. We need to spend it on R&D, on market expansion, on actual growth. This touchy-feely culture experiment is a distraction from what Grant Tech does best: build innovative technology and dominate our market. Daniel felt Eleanor tense beside him. This was Morrison's real play, not attacking the numbers but attacking the philosophy behind them. Positioning compassion as weakness, culture change as distraction. Before Eleanor could respond, Daniel stood up. You're wrong, he said simply. Morrison looked at him with barely concealed contempt. Excuse me? You're wrong about culture being a distraction. You're wrong about compassion being weakness. And you're wrong about what makes companies successful. Daniel looked around the table. I spent 5 years invisible in this company. 5 years watching good people burn out and leave because they were treated like replaceable parts. And I watched executives like you chalk it up to that's just business, as if basic human decency was somehow incompatible with profit. Mr. Carter, I don't think... Then listen for once instead of talking. Daniel's voice was firm, but not angry. You want to know what Grant Tech does best? It's not building technology. It's the people who build that technology. The engineers working 70-hour weeks, the maintenance workers keeping systems running, the administrative staff holding everything together. Those people are Grant Tech's competitive advantage, not your market strategy or R&D budget. Daniel pulled up a slide on his tablet and projected it on the screen. This is Jessica Palmer. She's worked in your department for 8 years, Richard. She's won 3 innovation awards and holds 2 patents that generated $15 million in licensing revenue. She turned in her resignation last week because, and I quote, "I can't work for a company that treats people like numbers on a spreadsheet." Morrison's face went red. How did you? I talked to employees, all of them. That's my job. Daniel brought up another slide. This is Michael Torres, 10-year veteran in operations, brilliant systems architect, also quitting because of toxic management culture. This is Linda Chen. This is Robert Martinez. This is Amy Johnson. All talented, all leaving. All citing the same reason. They don't feel valued. Daniel looked directly at Morrison. Your department has a 40% turnover rate, Richard. 40%. Eleanor's reforms have reduced turnover to 15% in departments that implemented them. So tell me again how caring about people is bad for business. The room was silent. Morrison looked like he'd been slapped. Several board members were staring at him with dawning realization, and Eleanor was smiling through tears. The crash taught Eleanor something you've never learned, Daniel said quietly. That every person matters. Every life has value. And a company that forgets that isn't worth leading. So you can keep fighting these reforms if you want, but you'll be fighting the future. Because this is where business is heading, toward recognizing that humanity and profitability aren't opposites. They're partners. He sat down, his heart pounding. He'd probably just made an enemy for life, but he'd also told the truth, and that mattered more. The board voted an hour later. Eleanor's reforms were approved for company-wide implementation. Her leadership was affirmed with only 2 dissenting votes, Morrison and one of his allies. And in a surprising twist, Morrison was asked to step down as VP of Operations, effective immediately. The board cited concerns about department culture and retention rates. Walking out of the building afterward, Eleanor grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him into a conference room. "That was incredible," she said. "You destroyed him with facts and compassion. I couldn't have done it better myself." "I just told the truth." "You did more than that. You showed them what leadership looks like." Eleanor was crying now, not bothering to hide it. 6 months ago, I would have fought Morrison with aggression and dominance. I would have become him to beat him. But you showed a different way, a better way. We did it together, all of it. Daniel looked at her seriously. "But Eleanor, this is just the beginning. Real culture change takes years. There will be more Morrisons, more resistance, more setbacks. I know, but I also know I won't face them alone." Eleanor smiled. "You're stuck with me now, partner. Hope you're ready for the long haul." Wouldn't have it any other way. The memorial garden was Eleanor's idea. She wanted a permanent tribute to the 11 who died, something more lasting than a one-time service. She worked with Daniel and the families to design a space on Grant Tech's campus, a quiet garden with 11 trees, each one dedicated to a victim of the crash. The dedication ceremony was held on a sunny Saturday morning, exactly 1 year after the crash. Emma came with Daniel, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself and holding his hand as they walked through the garden. Each tree had a plaque with a name, dates, and a quote chosen by the family. Sarah Chen's read, "She taught us to reach for the sky." Marcus Washington said he built foundations that others could stand on. Jennifer Alvarez's inscription was, "Love is the greatest adventure." The families gathered around, some crying, some smiling, all of them grateful for this place to remember. Eleanor spoke briefly, her voice steady and strong. "This garden represents what we learned from loss, that every person leaves a mark on the world, and that mark matters. These 11 people made Grant Tech better just by being part of it. They make us better still by reminding us what's important." She paused, looking at Daniel. "Survival isn't enough. We have to deserve the second chance we were given. We have to build lives and legacies that honor those who didn't get that chance." After the ceremony, Catherine approached with her 2 teenagers. "Eleanor's told them all about you," she said, gesturing to her kids. "They wanted to meet the hero." "I'm not a hero. Daniel said automatically, but Catherine's daughter, a bright-eyed 16-year-old, cut him off. Aunt Eleanor says you never accept that. But saving someone's life makes you a hero, whether you admit it or not. Emma stepped forward, grinning. Don't bother arguing. Trust me, he's impossible. The two girls started talking, comparing notes on difficult fathers, and Daniel found himself laughing. This, he thought, this is what survival was for. Not grand gestures or headlines, but these small moments of connection and joy. Eleanor joined them, walking easier now, most of her physical recovery complete. Catherine and I have been talking, she said to Daniel. We want to do something together, a foundation maybe, focused on workplace culture reform across industries, using what we learned here as a model. That's ambitious. It's necessary. If we can change Grant Tech, we can help other companies change too. But we'll need someone who understands culture transformation from the ground up. Eleanor looked at him meaningfully. Someone who's lived it. Daniel saw where this was going. Eleanor, I just started getting comfortable with this job. Now you want me to, not now, eventually, when you're ready. She smiled. I'm learning patience. It's new for me. One crisis at a time, Daniel agreed. Let's finish transforming Grant Tech first. The year that followed brought changes Daniel couldn't have imagined. Grant Tech became known for its culture programs, winning awards and attracting top talent who wanted to work for a company that valued humanity alongside profit. Other corporations started reaching out, asking for advice on implementing similar reforms. Daniel's department grew from just him to a team of 12 culture specialists, each one dedicated to making sure employees felt seen and valued. The recognition programs expanded, the promotion pathways became clearer, and the wage increases for lower-paid workers started narrowing the income gap. It wasn't perfect. There were still executives who resisted, still departments where old habits died hard, but the trajectory was clear. Grant Tech was becoming the kind of company Daniel had always wished he worked for. His relationship with Eleanor evolved into something neither of them had expected. Not romantic, that would have been wrong, a confusion of trauma bonding with actual connection, but a deep friendship, the kind forged in crisis and tempered by mutual respect. They had dinner together twice a month, sometimes with Emma and Catherine, sometimes just the two of them. They talked about work, about life, about the nightmares that still came but less frequently now. They reminded each other of the beach, of the promises they'd made, of the people they'd committed to becoming, and slowly, painfully, they both healed. Emma's 13th birthday fell on a Tuesday. Daniel took the day off. His new position came with actual work-life balance, another culture change he'd implemented, and they spent it at the beach. Not the island beach, a normal California beach with sunbathers and surfers and the smell of coconut sunscreen. But standing at the water's edge, watching the waves roll in, Daniel felt the familiar tightness in his chest. You okay, Dad? Emma asked, sensing his tension. Yeah, just remembering. The crash? The survival. The fighting to get back to you. Daniel put his arm around her shoulders. Every morning on that island, I woke up and thought about you. About your smile, your laugh, your terrible jokes. You're the reason I didn't give up, sweetheart. Emma leaned into him. I'm glad you didn't. And I'm glad you met Miss Grant. I know it was scary and awful, but good things came from it too, right? Yeah, good things came from it. They walked along the shore, collecting shells and talking about her upcoming soccer tournament. Normal things, everyday things. The life Daniel had fought so hard to return to, made richer by everything he'd learned. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Garden looks beautiful today. Thinking about our friends. Daniel typed back, Me too. See you Monday? Wouldn't miss it. We're changing the world, partner, one culture reform at a time. Daniel smiled and pocketed his phone. He looked at the ocean, vast and powerful and terrifying, but also beautiful. Also life-giving, both destroyer and sustainer depending on how you approached it. Just like survival itself. Come on, Dad, Emma called, already running ahead. You're being all philosophical again. It's my birthday. You have to be fun. I'm always fun. You're a dad. It's physically impossible for you to be fun. Daniel chased after her, laughing, his broken ribs fully healed now, but his heart still mending. Maybe it would always be mending, carrying the weight of those who didn't make it, while celebrating the gift of still being here. That evening, he hosted a small party at their apartment. Emma's friends filled their small space with noise and chaos and joy. Eleanor came, bringing a gift and awkward small talk with 12-year-olds. Catherine and her kids showed up with cake. Marcus and his family rounded out the group. They sang happy birthday. Emma made a wish and blew out the candles. And for a moment, surrounded by the people he loved, Daniel felt completely at peace. Later, after everyone had gone home and Emma was asleep, Daniel stood on their small balcony looking out at the city lights. A year ago, he'd been lying on a beach wondering if he'd ever see this view again. Now here he was, alive and whole and building something meaningful. His phone rang. "Eleanor." "You okay?" she asked. "You seemed quiet tonight." "Just thinking about how far we've come." "From the island?" "From everywhere. From who we were before the crash to who we are now." Daniel leaned against the railing. "Do you ever wonder why we survived? Out of everyone on that plane, why us?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I used to think it was random, luck, chance, timing, but I don't believe that anymore." "What changed?" "Meeting Catherine's kids, seeing the culture shift at Grant Tech, watching you transform from invisible maintenance worker to someone who's changing lives." Eleanor's voice was soft. "I think we survived because we still had work to do, not just for ourselves, but for others. And we're doing it, Daniel. Every day we're doing it." "Yeah, I think you're right. Besides," Eleanor added, her tone lightening, "someone had to keep me from becoming a complete corporate robot. Apparently the universe decided that someone was you. Lucky me. Lucky both of us." They talked for a few more minutes before saying goodnight. Daniel stayed on the balcony a while longer, thinking about the island, the ocean, the crash that had changed everything. He thought about the 11 who didn't make it home, the lives cut short, the potential never realized. He thought about Sarah Chen and Marcus Washington and Jennifer Alvarez and the 8 others whose names were carved into plaques in a garden built to remember. And he made them a silent promise. "I'll keep fighting. I'll keep changing things. I'll make sure your deaths meant something." Because that's what survivors did. They carried the weight of those lost and transformed it into purpose. They turned tragedy into meaning, chaos into change, death into life. Daniel closed his eyes and felt the night breeze on his face. Somewhere in the darkness, the ocean whispered its eternal rhythm. Somewhere in the city, Eleanor was probably still working, unable to turn off her mind. Somewhere in her bedroom, Emma was dreaming about soccer games and birthday parties, and all the beautiful ordinary moments that made up a childhood. And here, on this balcony, Daniel Carter stood at the intersection of who he'd been and who he was becoming. Maintenance supervisor, father, survivor, friend, culture transformer, bridge between worlds. All of it, none of it, everything at once. He was just a man who'd pulled someone from the ocean and refused to let either of them drown. A man who'd learned that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant building a life worth living and helping others do the same. The nightmares would probably never completely stop. The survivor's guilt would always linger at the edges of his consciousness. But so would the gratitude, the purpose, the bone-deep knowledge that he'd been given a second chance and he was using it well. Daniel went inside, checked on Emma one last time, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, he would sleep. And for the first time in a year, when he closed his eyes, he didn't see the crash. He saw the garden, the memorial trees standing strong, reaching toward the sky, their roots deep in the earth, growing, living, thriving, just like him.